Yeah.
It works?
It works.
Okay, good.
Are you going to put yourself right now? You have one that's going first? You have a presentation that's going before mine? But do they have a cover, sort of a scroll?
For O2.
Yeah.
Michael,
What do you want?
do
I'm
do
busy.
do we have what do you call it?
Like a slide.
Something to project that says CSRC?
Oh. Yeah, let me see if I might have something on here.
Okay.
Is it PowerPoint or is that
Something like that. Have something.
So I have media files in my presentation. I need to bring those over too, right? So that
Unless you want to just use your laptop. I think this will go right in there.
oh, okay. Maybe that'll be easier. Yeah.
I think it goes here. Is it here?
Yes, I have that connection.
Yeah. Maybe that's the best thing.
That'd be great.
So Danny, you don't think I should just, as a preview, have the fishing videos?
That'd be really good. That'll set the stage.
Thank you for reminding me I had this thing on here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Who's that writing yours?
So now, let's test yours.
Yeah, can I test it?
You have to plug this in and this.
Okay.
Let's get the Yeah, I gotta get that.
Okay.
I made the same mistake with the guy. I was testing it this morning, and I had that one plugged in. It's like, it's not working. It's not
Oh,
working.
no.
It was the wrong thing. Oops, Jesus.
It's like did they get this at a rubber sale? Rubber sale?
Yeah, and then you could launch a rocket from here, actually. Like a little toy rocket. You can launch them from right here.
Oh my God, look at all the great data.
Hi Edith, how are
Hi,
you?
I'm good, how are you doing?
And you also
Good.
make these super slick PowerPoints. How do you know?
I was trained well.
By Danny? Did Danny teach you how to do that? Danny has to teach us how to do this.
I couldn't do it.
You should see our PowerPoints are from before there were PowerPoints.
I couldn't do it.
Look at
You're
this.
doing. Nice.
For as long as I can remember, since I was in kindergarten, my parents just told me, maybe I didn't even know exactly what college was. You know, they would say it in Spanish,
Back-
universidad. But
Nice.
Great.
Are we using our own computers or are we using?
You don't have to. You can load your PowerPoints onto the house computer. She has a busy situation here, so
I
it's
have a
better
lot
for
of
her to.
media stuff that I
Okay,
Yeah.
I can give you mine and can we check out then what it looked like?
Yeah, sure.
How are you, Edith?
I'm
Good to see you.
good.
Thanks so much for coming. Really
No
appreciate it.
problem.
I'm looking forward to your
It's-
presentation.
Well, it's, you know what, it was like, I couldn't really do a whole lot of data. And then, I did do the Latino, the Chicano Latino pipeline thing from undergraduate too.
Oh, nice.
I mean, it's all a talking point, but it's just a wonderful ways to connect.
Okay.
Library.
Yeah, and not everyone, I mean, we have, like Monica Garcia, who's coming, she's a board member in LAUSD, so we have people who, not everyone's coming with like data-driven presentations. It's really a mix of, just contributions to the discussion, so.
I'm looking forward to reading your paper.
Yeah.
Is it in here?
Yes, the policy brief on migration is in there, the report is in there too, that I did. Well, Danny and I
Did you do
did.
the, is this the response to the microaggressions thing too? you said you were doing something?
This is what I was talking about, the brief.
Okay.
Yeah, regional progressions. So this is a quick, I mean, it's like a 2-pager.
So
it's
were
nice
you
for
able to get
dissemination.
the other stuff?
This is separate, so they
Uh-huh.
put it together. So it's just this,
Great.
right? So we have some of the models in here. So it's a really, you know, kind of short
Maybe we'll
brief.
post it on the, we'll post it on our web.
Yeah, yeah. And this is our report. So this is our 10th annual report right here on the education pipeline. So we did our first report in 2006 with the first conference event 10 years ago. And now this report's kind of following up to where we've come since.
Well, I mean, the undergraduate enrollment is increasing, but you're not seeing it go through the ranks and, I think it's grad, see, there's grad students 8%. For the whole UC system.
And faculty.
In fact,
It's like
6%.
Or 6.
Well, the
actually, no,
health,
it's in there.
health and international.
Exactly. Yes.
It's 4% for domestic and then 2% for Asia.
Yeah. And I put it in the UC is a whole system that disaggregates the data by international, domestic, faculty, CCs, CCCs, and CSUs.
But they're not getting a lot of international leaders, though.
CSU is. CSU is. Yeah. I don't know about community college, but I know that you have some international codes at least on my campus. But they're not collecting data. So it's hard to know.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So thank you, Amy. Thank you for sending
Yeah,
that.
I didn't, like, I can't do, so I used to have a staff to do PowerPoint, so it's just, I was lucky to even get my floor slides.
Is your daughter coming? Later?
No, she's gonna study, she said, she goes, you're spending the weekend with them and study, so.
Okay, good. Yeah.
But she is very interested in, she's a science person, she's interested, recently got interested in collaboration issues. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
What about long, Mom? He says, I don't know, what are we doing?
That's exciting. What's her major?
Our major is microbiology, immunology, and molecular genetics.
Okay.
So I was kind of pushing her towards looking at public health.
Oh, yes.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Jim, I think she's very sorry, get coffee.
Danny students are very connected to a lot of the programs.
You like muffins and then she's open the. Okay, no problem.
I don't think so. She's kind of, the science people just gonna get really nerdy. Just need the tiny little thing.
We're in South Campus together. Yeah. So maybe it would be useful for her to connect with some of Danny's students if you want to research what it looks like. Might be able to help her along. Where is she?
Where is she?
What year?
Senior.
Oh, she's
graduating in
graduating.
June.
I had a nice cup of coffee
How are you doing?
and we have most of a strange combination of leftovers from different universities.
I know, it's like, just get through it and then you'll be.
Just get through tomorrow and I'll be good. Yeah.
Oh, but it'll be
Yeah,
soon.
good. Thanks, Eden.
Okay, welcome.
Hi. Okay, good. Sorry. Yeah, we can put it on my computer because we're gonna use mine.
I just finished. Alright. I don't have the ads.
Okay, that's fine.
Do you have flash drive or should I email to you?
Yeah, I have flash. No, we can just put it on here. Okay. Yeah, and I'm gonna use my computer to look at the actually.
Okay.
Right.
So,
Let me put that on the
So
desktop
we're
for
gonna
you.
do introductions. Did you see the
so
report?
it's under Edith's presentation.
No, I'm ready. I got it.
Nice.
Just got it.
This has a little, this is like a little weapon.
Like 5.
Is it?
You can
I
like,
know, I borrowed it from my boss. I don't even have one of these things.
you know what I mean, look at that.
Graph.
Yeah.
It
Kind of
says
pointy,
20
huh?
Yeah.
and then it was 50.
So yeah, it's under Edith's presentation, inside Edith's presentation.
I'm gonna just put it right on top of the desktop.
We went back and forth. Well, Rebecca
Is this
and
it?
I checked.
Edith's presentation?
Yeah.
Just, and then open that,
Yeah.
and then pull that out.
Is it here? Did you bring it? It's here. Do you have a?
Oh, do you, I have.
I don't have Or I can email it to you.
No. Well, flash drive. If it's pictures, my email.
It's not that many. It's only 7 slides.
I didn't realize we were gonna be sitting down.
What was the name of your presentation?
FLSS,
FLSS, do you see it?
right there. It's in the middle between,
Oh, I see it, I see it.
you put it at the bottom, I think.
Just wanted to make sure that we're good. Looks good.
Okay, so can you check out, so the second one is the video, and I just wanna make sure the sound is good on that.
Sure.
And then when you blow up, and the other thing I wanted to find out is
okay.
number
Add it on.
number
Are you,
four
no,
slide.
I'm not gonna add them on there.
Oh,
On my laptop.
I think the video is not going to be good on this.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's going to look for the file. That's the same reason Lindsay's using her computer.
Yeah.
Because all of her media is on the computer, and the PowerPoint doesn't really drag.
The PowerPoint has the whole video on there.
No, it pulls it from somewhere else. It pulls it from where the original source.
Yeah, the whole thing is in there, so.
But it's seeing question mark for that video. You see that little question mark? It's looking for this file because this file is not on this computer. See what I'm saying?
That's weird.
Because you attached it. You think I've done this. I made this mistake 100
I
times.
embedded the whole video.
You think you did.
Okay. Okay, so,
Really, I would have had to do it this way.
It has to be with your
I would
machine.
have had to turn it into this one, last one.
well,
I knew that was
it's so weird because, so it can't play it.
No, because that file doesn't exist on this computer.
Oh.
This one? What, should I wait until it's?
So I have to switch my name there. Well, I'm the first presenter
I don't
anyway.
know where I have it. I tried to make changes to it on my hair, whatever. It is good.
This is good. This is the way it's going to work. So you're the first presenter?
In the last segment.
Okay.
So we can set up beforehand and then I take my stuff.
First presenter of the last segment of the afternoon. Oh, fine. So you know this is going to work now. Let's just
Well, I
go.
don't-
Let's go. Let's
Yeah,
no,
I've
no,
never
no.
seen that work on
No, I
it.
could. Well, I could see that it's not. Doesn't have a question mark on it.
Well, how do they do that if I embed my PowerPoint?
Yeah, but it doesn't pull PowerPoint. I think it doesn't pull the actual file into the.
I can send it anywhere because the file is too big.
That's right.
For the video.
That's right.
But then it's pulling something. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't explain all the specifics, but I know.
Yeah.
I guess I should charge my computer up. I'm glad I brought my computer.
Mhm.
It's not.
A couple of things on it. Your whole computer is a little
Yeah.
frozen right now.
Yeah.
Does your computer freeze up a little bit? Yeah, the whole thing is frozen right now. I have a very similar vintage Mac that's getting to be tired and freezing up like this.
3 years old.
Mine is from 2010. It's a similar vintage.
I was doing it in the car too.
Should I restart it?
You might have to.
It's time to get a new computer. Really?
You can see it just afoot.
I need to set it.
Yeah, I need to, you have to, I have to show them their little time. Things.
Just got my phone and email. Then the big.
It's really cool.
That was last
I got you an extra copy of the report.
Yeah.
little, something that to help you along the way, bring it to a dealer, get the hardware first, and I don't remember that, might buy them everything for sale.
Well, they have the new operating system. You will not use the operating.
I do, I always update. I do, I always update. Yeah.
That's how it's done. I've been noticing this all this thing.
Lately, mine too, just like. Mhm. And, but it needs the,
The USB?
Mhm.
Okay. I'm gonna try for mine.
That's Daniel's.
Okay. Are you staying all day? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
That's just a
We
standard
have
thing.
free wine.
After?
I'm trying to get one. I have to go get the girls because they get up
You have to do
at the
something.
day and it ends at 5:30. So I was like,
You're getting better, things are getting better.
and she was trying to meet me at the reception. I was like, it's a big deal. It's our 10th anniversary. And I was like, I'll try.
So you come.
I don't know. I have my own car.
But you're bringing the girls.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know what we're doing. We're gonna figure it out.
So do you work with the faculty development office here at UCLA and stuff?
No. Oh, sure.
So I should plug my computer in so it's fully charged and then I'm not sure.
Yeah. It's so dark here, I lose you.
Oh, okay. Oh, for recording.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, that's fine.
I think it won't be too bad.
Okay.
Do you think so?
Yeah, it should be fine.
It's not, I don't think the sun's gonna clock too badly in here.
Okay.
Be self-saving. Here's the thing. We're scientists, not the ethnic studies department. We need to be focused on hard science if we're going to sustain our reputation, not just nationally, but internationally.
She spent half as much time.
Okay, you good?
Okay. So you'll plug in if you need to.
I'll help you.
Thank you. Do you know where there's somewhere I can sit and I can plug this in? Outside?
There should be power around, look around.
Outside? Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mostly it's against this wall though, I think.
Okay.
You're not right there.
over here. If you want to just, put your computer somewhere here. I think you can enter this camera around here somewhere.
Isn't there a way to do media?
I don't know.
No? Okay.
I have that same one too. And I don't know.
Okay.
You know,
I guess I'll just stand over there.
I've never even used it. can get up and wait.
I can ask Danny to join. He disappeared. Oh, I think he's working on his presentation. That's fine.
Oh, I haven't seen.
Where is this taken? Okay. You've come this far, huh? How are you? Good, how are you? Coming from Fresno. We had a bit of a drive, so that's what we're saying.
Okay.
You know, take advantage of everything that's here.
I can get it. I can go.
My colleague and friend is coming from Monterey. Like to let the girls
But it was in Sacramento.
Oh my goodness.
But she told Jessica,
I think it would
she
have
told
done it
Jessica
just
that I was helping my son with his college applications. And I said, he's 13 years old, it's his high school applications. She's not.
I said I wasn't sure.
Yeah, that was Viola.
Viola, pretty close.
And that was down the street.
Oh, where she's at? Oh, okay, so it's Viola, so it is Viola.
No, Viola.
Yeah, I don't, you got me.
Is that funny? That's my,
So I kind of figured you were gonna be here, so that would it be all clarified.
so.
Yeah, we're going. I'm so glad.
The entire thing because Rita and John. It's George, Ben, myself, Rita, and John.
So I was upset.
Sure.
It should never phase us. I got an interesting thing from Sylvia. The book cover program.
Yeah. But it's not published yet.
It's coming out. Yeah.
Do we have a book?
Yeah, oh, it's kind of last night. Took a shower and I was like, packed it up. This is how I wake up. Yeah.
Oh, so you set for soup the nuts here? All right. Remember to do one of those kind of psychedelic filters when I'm up there.
It's fun lights.
Cut through to the other scene of Star Wars.
You want those two?
So it looks like this. I set it up so it's already,
Okay.
it's already embedded. So you just like, yeah, and so I have,
Am I gonna switch over? Or are you gonna switch over?
I'll switch over. Yeah.
And I'll just come up here.
Yes, I did. So you can, Sean, it's Sean, and then that's when I'll come and search on.
Because I have other slides.
Oh, okay.
This, are you the only slide? I just put my numbers.
Okay, ready on the left.
Because that would be the transition.
Well, I was planning to stay right here. Yeah, please do that.
Is anybody sitting here? I'm not going to use, no, this is for the lunch.
The lunch, okay, the lunch is actually.
Okay. You want me to? Okay.
Is that okay or do you?
Yeah, no, it's fine. There's a lot of, there are a lot of PowerPoints here, so it's short.
Okay.
I can move.
Okay, let me ask.
The dean has his keynote presentation PowerPoints for the red balloon. Should we set it up for this?
We can put it on to the,
Is it the same computer here?
yeah, well, we're going to drag it over.
Oh, okay.
Great. So I just show you which one. Okay, it's immigration in the state of education.
This one?
No, it's
Okay,
open.
right next to it.
Yeah, you don't want to take all of these.
Yeah, no,
These are, there's a lot of private stuff in there.
It's all gonna open up.
Yeah, it's all. This is for the papers we're doing.
Yeah, no.
I'm
sorry. We're switching to the yeah, they're your guys.
Right. This is going to be for the lunch, so will this be the same laptop? Okay.
So it's just this way here, so immigration and the state. You see, once you copy all.
No, I don't.
I don't know why he wants to do that.
Why don't you just open it?
Yeah. It's all highlighted and doesn't want to unhighlight.
This one right here.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I expect him to be. But he's
Sure.
doing really good. He's doing better, like a little better.
No, that's
He's we're not doing.
Okay, so it's immigration and state education.
I would just.
He's there. Yeah, he's there all day. He loves it. He likes it.
It's an all day.
Yeah, he's there till like 3. Yeah. How's it? How are you doing? Good. Yeah. Are you teaching it?
It's the rack. Next semester I teach the Korea summer. And then for the first time in 7 years I'm teaching and year 2.
Okay. Oh, that's really cool.
In the spring.
They're really gonna love that. That's really good.
But yeah, I'm finding out that you guys are teaching that. Juliana's teaching it over at Fullerton.
Yeah, because something is about it.
It's 12:30.
I heard he was teaching the same class at Yale.
Oh, she is? Education.
Older teens.
Yeah. Yeah, next semester I'm gonna be not next semester. This fall I'm gonna be teaching preparatory studies graduate class. Yeah, because the students demand it, so
In sociology.
we have a critical race studies class. Graduate class. Mike Feather.
I think this is what was just planned.
Really great. Yeah.
They want masters for education.
The graduate students coming up. Yeah, I'm excited about that.
Sure, it's there. It says it's there.
It's supposed to be an action. It's supposed to be an action.
Oh yeah, it's this weekend, huh?
That's
Yeah. Oh, that's all the people can get. Yeah, live for it.
immigration.
There it is. There it is.
Good Lord.
All right.
Yeah.
Wow.
She's retired. Well, any attempt to try to get her into this that even resembles work she was doing. Wait.
Thank you so much.
Good for her. Great. Right here. We'll apply for the master's program.
I'm not sure what to do. I got
Yeah.
a bunch of fingers.
No, I know.
People are sort of ready to go.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But you're
Yeah, it's fun to work on.
The others are here, so I want you to come say hi.
Hi, Anita. How are you?
Good to see you.
Everybody, I would like to introduce you to my professor and advisor from grad school. This is Danny Solorzano. The reason that I went through grad school successfully was this is Desiree, Ashley, Carmina, Jasmine, Kirby, Emily, Carmina, and Juan. And they're also restarting the Manchati at UNLV, so that's another way that they came together. But we'll through that the day. Thank you. Yeah, come sit over here. Oh, yeah. That makes sense. And you can also escape from that. Yeah. Did you send an information?
I can talk really fast.
Yeah, I know. Good. Gotta.
Is this yours? No, please.
And I can just.
Yeah, you come in and out. Okay. I was like, I don't know who's this stuff is, but either they'll be friends with us or they'll be
Yeah.
Oh, she is? So, okay, so who's going to start? I'm just going to introduce you. Can you read the title of the presentation? Should I do it all at once or just at each time? Your call. Sure.
He does it. Yeah. Is that how they're going? Yeah. But he's like, because I know he needs to get that.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
How are you? It's good to see you.
Michael, ¿tienes los llaves?
Oh,
I do. So go there and then come back. Okay. It's all right. Do you want me to leave him with, or I'll just bring it back for you. These are in your office?
You know, on the left hand door.
Yeah.
Down just for this.
Thank you so much for coming.
I actually visited two businesses after I told them about they had classes
Oh no, I saw your review. But good, I'm here. We're together new stuff. Well, not new stuff. This is like a new story. So we'll That's it. You're good. Baby was mad when I left. She was not happy that I quit. And then Diana didn't get to go to present today, so she was not happy either. No, I'm leaving around 3. much.
No.
Yeah, it sounds like running it is hard.
Thank you.
Sorry. Second, we have two. I already used to be nice to meet you. Year two. The first is. What's up, Lena?
Can I give you my
Is it just a simple presentation?
Yeah.
Just slow down.
Thank you.
I'm going to say.
I don't even know the full story. But I'm doing one right now. We're here on a positive conference, and we're gonna do
Story. So can I do this as a photo of everybody? You're sitting amongst my people. Baby, can I take a picture? Jasmine, you close. This head. Thank you.
Is my cord in your way? You can unplug it. Okay. I just need to charge it for my presentation, but I'm pretty done with it. If it gets in your way. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna get started. If we could ask everyone to come in, if there's anyone else outside to have a seat. Welcome everyone to our 10th annual Latina Education Summit, sponsored by the Chicano Studies Research Center and the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Buenos dias. I'm sure glad this day is finally here. It's so nice to see all of you. As folks were coming in, I've heard that there are people who've driven from up north, Central Valley, Los Angeles, Las Vegas. We have a group up here representing Las Vegas to come to share this day with us. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who have come to this event to have some engaging discussions around the Latino educational pipeline. I'll keep my comments brief. My name is Dr. Lindsay Perez-Huber, and I'm co-coordinator along with Dr. Carlos Jaro, who's hiding in the back. And we've worked on what we think is going to be a really amazing day of researchers, of scholars, of students who are working, engaging in discussions about how to improve the Latino educational pipeline. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of context about this event. This is our 10th annual, but actually began more than a decade ago at a convening at Chon's house, Chon Noriega, the director of CSRC, with a couple of faculty members at the UCLA Graduate School of Education. And also Monica Garcia, who is going to be one of our panelists here in our opening panel, along with Dr. Danny Solórzano, Carlos Jaro, of course, Chon, Concepcion, Dr. Concepcion Valdez, who is also a faculty member in the Department of Education, as well as, someone can help me, there was an attorney from MALDEF also there. Victor Viramontes, okay. So this was in 2003, I believe, and these were the initial discussions. This was really where the ideas of this Latino Education Summit annual conference was born. So fast forward to 2003, I was a graduate student here at UCLA in the Department of Education, working with Danny Solorzano. And it was actually before I started working with Danny, I knew I was coming to this program. I had just moved to Los Angeles, and it was the first time since I was about 14 years old that I didn't have a job, coming to a new city and starting a graduate program. And so I remember thinking about, okay, I need to find a job. I also was a parent. My daughter was 1 year old at the time. And so I felt pretty desperate to find something. And so I came to campus and I thought, okay, I'm gonna print out my resume and find the Chicano Latino Ethnic Studies Center somewhere on this campus. And so I did a search on the UCLA website and I found the Chicano Studies Research Center, and reading through the site, it seemed like an amazing place. So I printed out my resume, which was probably a little less than up to par at the time, and I brought it with me. I walked into the center, and I just happened to run into Dr. Carlos Jaro, who was the assistant director at the time, and he just happened to be in the main office. So I handed him this resume. I said, I just started a graduate program here. I'm in the Department of Education. I see that some of the work that the center does. Here's my resume. Is there anything that I can do for you? And he looked at it and he said, sure, come next week. So it was this moment where that opportunity, the opportunity that Dr. Carlos Jaro had given me that day, started what is now a more than a decade relationship with the center. That was about 2004 that I walked into the CSRC. And so since, we have begun discussions and thinking about what we want this conference to look like. Our first annual conference was in 2006, and this is our 10th annual event. And so I have to acknowledge Dr. Carlos Jaro, who has really been the person to drive and make sure that these education summits happen every year and that we have these fruitful discussions every year. So thank you, Dr. Carlos Jaro, for taking a chance on me and for always being dedicated to making sure that these conferences happen every year. So thank you. I wanted to take a moment to just give you a round of applause. Gracias, Carlos. So I'd like to introduce the director of the Chicano Studies Research Center, who is always have been so supportive of this event, Dr. Chon Noriega. His bio is in, it's actually, I think, a bio that doesn't quite do him justice, that's in this program. But this is Dr. Noriega's 14th year here with the center as the director, really leading the center into new and exciting directions over the past decade plus. So Dr. Noriega is a professor in the UCLA Department of Film, Television, and Media. He's a prolific writer, so he's written over close to, I think, 10, 15 books. Since 1996, he's also been the editor of Aztlan, which is the Journal of Chicano Studies. He's curated numerous exhibitions in museums across the country. His awards include Getty Postdoc Fellowship in Art of History. He's a Rockefeller Foundation Film, Video, and Multimedia Fellow, and an Anne Rosenfield Distinguished Community Partner Prize. And so with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Chon Noriega. Thank you.
Sometime before noon when lunch is served, and every year we have such a great turnout for the Education Summit, with people coming from all over the region and sometimes other states. So I want to thank you all for coming out here, being a part of the event this day. And in my introductions, I want to start with the fact that technically I'm not here. I am on sabbatical this quarter, which means that I am relieved from both teaching and administrative duties. So I have every right to be playing hooky. And yet here I am, and I'm here for two reasons. And I'll go through each of these reasons. But first I want to just acknowledge that the person who is acting director right now, Charlene Villasenor Black, is also here. I think you're still here, right, Charlene? There you are, because I'm going to call you up later. And Lindsay had mentioned that I've been the editor of Aslan, a journal of Chicano studies, since 1996. Actually, I will be stepping down early in the winter, and Charlene will be taking over as the new director. I figured 15 years was enough, and it's actually been 20. So it's time to bring in somebody that will bring new energy, new ideas to it, and really continue the 45, 46-year legacy now of the journal as a major platform for multi as well as interdisciplinary work. That we get submissions from all fields and we don't filter that down. This is really a place where people working on research related to the Chicano experience can find a kind of rigorously reviewed outlet for that work. So I'm glad to have her taking over. Now, the first reason I'm here is the importance of this topic, education. And when I first became director and we're looking around figuring, well, we can't do everything, even though we have a comprehensive mission at the center. Where do we need to really put an emphasis? And we settled on education, partly because by that point I had hired Carlos Aro as an assistant director, his second tour of duty at the center. The first one was in the 70s. And that was where he got his PhD. But also in looking around the university, we really only found one department where you could expect to see more than one or two Chicano faculty members, and that was education. And we had played a role, the center had played a role in the 70s with the appointment of Concepcion Valadez as the first. So it made sense to pull those people together, Chris Gutierrez, Concepcion, Danny, and have a discussion about what was needed. And as Lindsay pointed out, it ended up in my Echo Park dining room with a table that went out into the hallway, and with people that we had been able to convince to come there because something like this had never happened. Where you get the people doing the research, with the people that are there on the front lines with the political end of education, and those with the administrative end, and those, like a lot of us are teaching, we're also on the ground. And to just have that discussion of what could really help, because we are facing a very unique situation that's now kind of norm for most larger cities, which is nearly 3/4 of the kids in the public schools were Latino, most of those Mexican descent, and yet you wouldn't say that the policy reflected that, and really took into account some of the very particular needs and also some of the very particular assets that these students brought to the educational arena. So we did team up with LAUSD. We had Jose Huizar, Monica Garcia was there. We had the Montebello School District, and we had the top two people there, Maggie Mejia, and forget the guy that replaced her when she left for the Bay Area, but and MALDEF as well. And kind of really talked it through and came up with what became the outlines for the Education Summit. Now, the idea behind it is it's really a place where people can meet. And we've really, through Carlos's leadership, tried to make that as broad as possible. So it's not just the folks kind of taking the bird's eye view, whether it's from the political side, the administrative side, or from academic research, but also the people on the ground, including students, families, community groups, advocacy groups, that are really trying to push the ball forward and improve the opportunities. We came up with this idea that Danny kind of brought to us in terms of the pipeline. And just looking in the Los Angeles area, you'd have to say that there were more leaks than there were kind of the ability to move water through, as it were, where you go from 75% down to about 1/8 of that by the time you get to UCLA. And that didn't seem right for what should be the flagship public university in this region that is really addressing, in many fundamental ways, the needs of the region. And not just through the research, but through the training of the next generation. So in doing that, we've had a number of institutional partners that have been very critical. This couldn't be something we did on our own or with a handful of faculty. And from the start, we've had the support of the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, the School of Law, as well as MALDEF. And this year, we're grateful to have the co-sponsorship of the UCLA Institute of American Cultures, which when we started was a granting arm of the Ethnic Studies Centers. And now it's our administrative hub. and we have our own vice provost. So this is an improvement that has happened in terms of the structuring within the university, but also UCLA Student Affairs and the UCLA Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which again didn't exist until this fall, and is also a result of pushes by African American, Asian American, Chicano, Latino, and American Indian faculty to say, we really need to take a look at what's happening to the faculty on this campus. Because without them, and without them having support, you're going to be hard-pressed to serve well the students that you're trying to open up to in order to diversify. As I mentioned, we've had participation by faculty. Danny, Lindsay has been there from the start as a student, and now as a professor. Robert Chao Romero, and others. But I'd also like to acknowledge the staff at the center who really in many ways make this possible and will ensure that even though you may forget, this name tag will get you to lunch when you head over to the where we're eating. But really make possible events like this on a day-to-day basis, and not just the making them happen, but making them known more broadly in terms of putting out the scholarship. We're live streaming right now, and on the communications and community partnership side. So that includes in the back there, Connie Heskett, who's in the back, Rebecca Epstein. We hire a lot of Rebeccas. Rebecca Frazier, who's not here right now, Andrea Vargas, Michael Stone at the camera, and Darling. Darling Sienna is back there. And so I want to give them all a round of thanks as well as the faculty. So that's all reason one. Now, reason two has to do with the person who really took the charge and developed it and has brought us to this point 10 years later, and that's Carlos Otto. And he was a lifesaver for me because I came in as a new director. Needless to say, there's always politics, and I didn't quite understand all of them. So I got somebody who'd gotten his butt kicked the first go-round, the first 10 years of the center. And he was very helpful in educating me to how one reads what happens within institutions. For a lot of us who are first generation into college, and sometimes we're the first generation into a professional arena, you don't have that as a background. Your parents weren't able to say, here's how you navigate through higher education. Here's how you navigate through a law firm. Here's how you navigate through a corporate office. And without that, you're learning things for the first time, and you're often learning them without other people there that have had your experience and can mentor you. And so it's really important to be able to have that ability to learn how to read, because you're likely not to respond in the way you would if you didn't have that, which is to be a little more reactive and a little more angry because things aren't going your way and nobody's supporting you. So I have to say personally, he was very helpful with me on that, and I was trying to think of the ways to acknowledge that, and I realized I could tell you all about the conferences he's done besides the Ed Summits and all of that. The fact that all of the projects, like everything we do, he has really made sure there was an archival component, a scholarship component, and a community engagement component. That we aren't just doing a conference, we're really making sure it has a broad impact. And I thought the only way I could do that was in song. And so, Carlos, could you come up here? I want to sing you a song. Come on up, Carlos, you gotta do it. I did ask for the coat because I miscalculated. I was basing it on Danny. I was like, Danny's not going to wear a coat today. Guy shows up with the jacket. So. All right, Carlos, I'm going to try my best. I'm not really known for singing, but this is also coming by way of Hilda Solis, County Supervisor for Los Angeles. And it's actually a commendation. So, Carlos Manuel Otto, Assistant Director Emeritus, honoree, the 10th Annual CSRC Latina Education Summit. And I'm going to read the rest. Okay, Carlos. In recognition of dedicated service to the affairs of the community and for the civic pride demonstrated by numerous contributions for the benefit of all citizens of Los Angeles. November 6th, 2015, Hilda Solis, Supervisor, 1st District.
Now I can sit.
Now you can sit. So Carlos, it's a small token of thanks. When the staff made sure we're able to present to you, and all by way of saying, you don't get to retire yet. So, I'd like to briefly introduce our next speaker, our co-organizer. I'll say that when I realized that in that packet I just gave Carlos were the last 4 pages of my introduction, so I will have to just go with the first page. But it's, we've always had a great working relationship with the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. It's been an extreme pleasure to have Marcelo Suarez Orozco as the Dean. He's now entering his 4th year as Dean, as the Wasserman Dean, and also as a Distinguished Professor of Education. And his research interest and the incredible output associated with those interests align very well with what we're doing and actually help us in pushing beyond the more national and regional focus we've had. Because he focuses on cultural psychology and psychological anthropology with an emphasis on globalization, mass migration, and education. You'll get a more proper introduction to him in the program, and Carlos Aro, he promises not to sing this one, but he'll be introducing Marcelo at the lunch keynote that he'll be giving. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome up Marcelo Suarez Orozco.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. Buenos dias. Thank you. Sean, where did you get those glasses? I mean,
do we have the same one?
I got mine in Brooklyn. I don't know where you got yours, but anyway, they look great.
LA work.
It looks great. Look great. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so delighted. I'm so proud. I'm so happy to be a small part of this extraordinary gathering. As John was speaking, I'm thinking now we have them all. We have Noriega and Noguera, and one letter tells the whole story, right? I'm so happy. GSCNIS, of course, home of the great luminaries in the field of Latino education. My colleague, my advisor, my friend, Dani Solórzano. Of course, Carlos, thank you so much. Thank you for your work. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the legacy that you've given us. And Lindsay, thank you for playing such an amazing role. GSCNIS is especially happy to be a part of this very special 10th year anniversary conference. This for us at UCLA is a time to celebrate 10 years of scholarly work on broad topics relating to Latino education. It is a time to pause, and it's a time to reflect on the challenges, on the battles moving forward. The topics we've engaged over the decade, from Latinos in community college, to undocumented Latino AB 540 students, tell a story of a broad intellectual vision, a dedication to a kind of engaged scholarship that is driven by a muscular connection between research and practice, all animated by what really is a UCLA signature, the ethic of care, the spirit of social justice in the work we do. This year we return to a foundational theme, a theme that Danny and so many others have done so much to develop. The Latina education pipeline, learned lessons and sites of possibilities. The topic is an urgent topic. And let me highlight why. The United States is witnessing two unprecedented pharaohic formations, monumental new formations. First, the growth, the breathtaking growth of the Latino school population nationwide at a time of new levels of inequality that are now surpassing all previous historic records. At a time when more is asked of education than ever before in human history, growing inequality, and our unfinished business, educating all Latinas, all Latinos to their great potential, threaten our economic vitality, our social cohesion, and our most fundamental democratic ideals. Let me be clear, given our demography moving forward, without a bright Latina and Latino education future, there is no bright American future. Let me highlight the importance of this topic. The Holy Father, Francisco, has identified the issue of the education, the well-being, the fundamental protections due to immigrant and minority children all over the world, a numero uno priority. I'm honored beyond words to announce that I will be joining the Holy Father again next week in the Vatican for a high-level summit on these issues. This is an issue very near and dear to the Holy Father's heart. His first two sentences to Barack Obama in the White House were, "Thank you, Mr. President. I am the child of immigrants. I'm happy to be in the country built by immigrants." I'm quoting the Holy Father. GSENIS is proud of our partnership over the decade with our colleagues at the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center, as well as the many scholars, practitioners of goodwill, students who have contributed to Latino education over this last monumental decade. The topic of our 10th convening is near and dear to GSENIS. Education and information studies are deeply ingrained in the DNA of UCLA. From the founding in 1882 of the Los Angeles branch of the State Normal School, the second normal school in the state. First one was up north, and that became San Jose State. We became UCLA. From the founding in 1882 of the normal school in an Orange Grove, now the site of the Los Angeles Public Library, to 1919, when the State Normal School officially became, and this was our baptismal name, the southern branch of the University of California, Berkeley. Amazing, those folk up there.
Of Anaheim.
To the globally renowned UCLA of today, education and information studies have been at the center of the university's evolution. We are the DNA of UCLA. We are the mitochondrial. We are the nucleic acid. We are the Eve. Without us, there would be no UCLA. UCLA and Los Angeles grew together. Let me try a hypothesis with you. Each city gets the university it deserves. In the 21st century, Los Angeles is the vibrant, brilliant, pulsating global city at the edge of the great rising civilizations of Asia Pacific and Latin America. LA is not so much a city of neighborhoods as New York, as much a city of nations. The great Thomas Jefferson once said, "We all have two cities, We all have two cities, our own and Paris. Let me say this, in the 21st century, many countries in the world have two capitals, their own and LA. We are this world's second capital. From Armenia to El Salvador, from Mexico to Iran, from Guatemala to Cambodia, LA now has the second largest number of citizens originating in nearly 20 different countries. We are the other Armenia, the other Cambodia, the other El Salvador, the other Korea, the other Mexico, the other Guatemala, the other El Salvador. And today, we live better, we eat better, we have better music, Professor Noriega, because LA is this amazing city of nations. UCLA is the university LA deserves. I'm delighted to give a warm welcome to our distinguished panelists, our faculty, students, researchers, practitioners doing fundamental work on what matters most in education in the 21st century, the discovery and application of usable knowledge at the crossroads of policy and practice. Purposeful work to prepare all our citizens, all Latinas and Latinos, to be fully engaged in an ever more miniaturized, interconnected, and fragile world. You will have an amazing work ahead of you today. I hope you enjoy the conference. I hope you enjoy your sojourn at UCLA. Bienvenidos, felicidades. I will be back for the comida at lunch, at noon, and I will share with you more substantial reflections on the nexus between migration, inequality, and education in the 21st century. Muchas gracias. Buenos días.
We have one more speaker who's been with us from the start, and for many of the previous 9 was the faculty sponsor working with Carlos Aro. And that's Daniel G. Solorzano, who's a professor of social science and comparative education. And Danny's done a lot of the research with his students, and if you look at the publications that have come out of this, he's always sharing the limelight. He's also mentoring students into the research process, the publication process. And I think it's an important aspect of the work that he's done and that we're trying to do through the Education Summit. One of the areas he's focusing on, that he's written about with the policy briefs that we have for this conference, is racial microaggressions and other forms of everyday racism. And I just want to put that in the context of being that he's very mindful of the fact that a lot of times we're dealing with macroaggressions as well. And that gets perhaps more of the public scrutiny or attention. And it's important to really balance these in terms of really understanding what's happening in society. Now, in terms of the emphasis on diversity, it's not just through the research. Danny's walk the walk. He's the Associate Dean of Equity and Diversity and the Chief Diversity Officer in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. And he's also the director of the UC All-Campus Consortium on Research for Diversity. And I think he's had that position for, what, about 40 years now?
I'll update you in a second.
A long time, okay. But what I want to end with is, we know he's an education professor, but he also walks the walk in teaching, and in 2007 was awarded the campus's Distinguished Teacher Award. And so with that, I want to introduce Danny.
Just a bit of an update. I stepped down as Associate Dean of Equity and Diversity in September, and I turned it over to my colleague Tyrone Howard, who's now the Associate Dean. I agreed with Marcelo to do that for a year as that transition position. And UC Accord, unfortunately, the UC Office of the President didn't continue funding of UC Accord after 15 years. And so I'm no longer the director of UC Accord. But I was a part of that UC Accord for close to 14 years, 15 years, along with Jeannie Oakes, my colleague. I want to add my welcome. I'm just so excited to see you all here after 10 years. And again, just once again acknowledge John Noriega's, his vision, Carlos Otto's vision, Lindsay Bettis's vision of this summit over the last 10 years. So I want to recognize them as well. But John mentioned something about back in 2003 when we met at his house in Echo Park. He said that he looked to departments who had Latina and Latino faculty, and he looked to education as one of the few departments, unfortunately, here at UCLA, that for the last 15 years have had a growing number of both Latina and Latino faculty, Asian American faculty, and African American faculty. But just a quick story. I mean, when our dean, and I want to thank him for being here today and for his leadership, when our dean came here 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, he had negotiated 4 FTEs, 4 hires. All 4 of his hires had been people of color. 1 Afro-Latino, 1 Mexicana, 1 African American, and 1 Asian American. And so he continues as a dean walking the walk. And again, I think that's what leadership has to do. Again, it's really important that we continue to diversify our faculty and our student population here at UCLA. But as you all know, if you're not mindful of that in the ongoing, it's a continuous battle. If you're not mindful of it, you can easily slip back to the way things were 20 years ago here at UCLA, at least in our school. Right? When I got here 26 years ago, it was not as diverse, nowhere near as diverse as it is today, as a result of our leadership. And again, our leadership right now in our department, in our school, I should say, is our dean, Marcelo Suarez Orozco. So thank you, Marcelo. A couple of things that I want to share with you. I also want to thank Marcelo Suarez Orozco and the dean of the College of Education at Cal State Long Beach, Marquita Grenon Shire, who basically, I'm really thankful for this, they paid for the printing of the research report and the policy brief. And so we were actually not going to have it here. So thank you for that, and thank you for the dean at Cal State Long Beach for doing that. And that's really important. But what I want to do today, as I make my transition, as we make our transition into the first panel, is to share just a couple of numbers with you, just to reinforce what Sean, Marcelo, and others have been saying. And so, let's see if we can get this. Okay, why is it not working? Okay, it should work now. 53%. For those who don't know, 53%, what that number means is that in the state of California today, right, if you looked at the percentage of the K through 12, the percentage of enrollments in K through 12 schools in the state of California, 53% are Latino, right? We're now a majority. We've been a majority now for at least 4 years, but that's an important number. The second number is 30th. If that 3.2 million Latino K through 12 students were a state, they'd be 30th between Connecticut and Iowa. That's how big this population is, right? Let's move to another segment. If 25% of all community college students in the country, 25% of all community college students in the country are in California. In California's 113 campuses. It's the largest system by far in the United States. Texas is second at about 73. That's how big our California community college system is. 42%. What that represents, the head count as of this academic year, or last academic year, the head count at the community colleges, 42% of all community college students in the state of California are Latino. Right? We're now a plurality, meaning we're the largest group. I think whites are about 26%, so we've far past the whites, about a decade ago, actually. Right? Another number, 37%. 37% represents the percentage of undergraduate enrolled students at the California State University system, the CSU system, the largest public system, four-year public system in the country, with 23 campuses, right? In fact, we're getting close, Latinos are getting close to being, we have actually overtaken whites as the plurality in the California State University system. And then finally, 21%, and this is where we have to keep working. 21% represents the number of enrolled Latino students in the University of California, undergraduates, right? So these are some numbers I want to share with you today, through the day. I know I'm contextualizing to California, but my sense is that, these numbers can help us in our discussions as we move forward. But as we move forward, I also want to recognize that we're going to be dealing with some of these issues in each of these segments. And I hope everyone will be able to get I think I have and I should also say that all these numbers are going up. They're not going down. They're not flattened. They're all going up for many reasons that we can talk about throughout the day. And then finally, if we're going to talk about some of these issues, again, I hope every one of you were able to get the report that's out in the back and share it with folks. It's still falling through the cracks. Revisiting the Latino educational pipeline. Because in that, under Lindsay Perez-Huber's leadership, they put together a 16-page amazing report on the educational pipeline in all segments of the pipeline. For some of you, if you can't get it, it'll be available in PDF on Monday. And again, download it, share it with folks. Let's get that word out there. And so with that, I'm going to transition to the first panel. I'll start with, is Monica here? Mm-hmm. Monica Garcia? Monica Garcia is she was at our first meeting back in 2003. And an amazing leader. She is, I think, probably the Latina educational leader, political leader in probably the state, if not the country. She's an amazing resource for us, always has been an amazing resource for us. She's been, Monica, you're going to tell me how many years you've been on the LA? 10 years on the LA Unified School Board. LA Unified, as many of you know, is the second largest district in the country. And through her leadership, many things have been happening, some of which you'll be hearing about today. Our second, and her title of her presentation is A Culturally Relevant Curriculum in LAUSD High School Ethnic Studies Requirements. Our second panelist is Lindsay Perez-Huber. Again, as you heard earlier, she's a professor of education at California State University, Long Beach. And the title of her presentation is Making Education Work for Latinas in the United States. And then finally, Maria Malagon is a professor of sociology at Cal State Fullerton, and the title of her presentation is Improving Education and Life Trajectories for Latino Boys. So I want to turn this over to the panel. And I think, Monica, you're going to be first.
Oh, I am? Okay, great. Good. Buenos dias, buenos dias. So I have to thank you, Professor Solorzano, and I just tweeted out, thank you for your leadership. As a daughter of the East Side, I just celebrate that there is a person like Danny Solorzano giving his best every single day to make this world better. And so thank you. And to all of you, I have to first take a moment to just say thank you for keeping up the fight. I remember learning about Chicano studies at UC Berkeley, and I take that experience that semester where I earned a .045 GPA with me every day to work. And I remember Alex Zaragoza saying our mission is to destapar, because there's a lot of tapados. And he was talking to those of us in the room because we have to learn. So I bring with me the hunger of a community that wants an opportunity to learn. I bring with me the hunger of our young people who are looking for the adults in the system to address their needs. And I bring with me the request for all of you to continue to push and to ask the questions of why are so many left out. And I bring also optimism that together we are at a very important point that LA leads. The LA agenda is about the California agenda and about the American agenda. And that is true over and over and over. And while we started celebrating a decade of work here to focus on this population, in LA Unified, I am the third Latina in 155 years to be on the board. We have since elected 2 others that gave service, but our participation in this democracy is a lot of what this institute is about. Because when we cannot read and write, we cannot participate fully. And if we are to lead, then we ought to invest so that we can do the best we can. So our mission in LA Unified, where we are 74% Latino, is about getting to 100% graduation. And since the last time we met, we lost $2.7 billion in the Great Recession. And really, that set us back. From when I was a child, California was 7th in the nation in per pupil spending. We went down to 49th. We are now back at 33, but we are climbing our way out of an economic reality that very much impacted the kind of opportunity we can provide our youth. So in LA, big LA Unified, that's 530,000 young people. Maybe 30% of them are English language learners, 84% are children who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and 91% are children of color, okay? I bring you noticias that we have gone from 46% graduation to 70%. And this is an example of people are powerful. Our teachers and professors have stepped up, and we are a system that's transitioning. So the one that is dying, we couldn't afford it and it wasn't working for everyone. And we are growing something more modern, something that is about the classroom that keeps evolving, something that is about the world that is changing, and specifically around ethnic studies. Here is the good news. You have a Board of Education who endorsed that it should be a requirement, endorsed that by 2019, every high school student should have at least 1 semester to graduate, and yet we didn't fund it. The district told us that was going to be a $30 million investment. So I was reluctant to vote for it without voting for money, because I think that's a lie in budgeting. However, I embraced the energy that said, this is good and we should. The challenge for all of you is that we really don't know how, as a system, right? So when you mandate something, people are very good at checking the box. The notion of Chicano Latino studies that brings a political, economic, philosophical lens about change is the one that really is not, there's no meeting of the minds on that, right? So can I stand up and tell you about Mexicans and did I meet? What is that bar, right? But can I engage you in your reality? And I have a team that I'm very proud of. Roosevelt High School is present. And outside, and as we prepared for today, they shared with us how they are leading. So every 9th grader at Roosevelt High School takes a semester of Mexican American studies and then African American studies. And the theme there is Boyle Heights and me. And in Boyle Heights, that reminds us of struggle. So we are the district that has the best story of the kid lifting themselves out of poverty and overcoming all odds. And we have the story of just the challenge of how we don't meet our kids' needs. So in Boyle Heights, where we have Mr. Lopez and Mr. Gertner and teacher Andrea? Roxana. Tell me your last name? Dueñas. Would you all stand up and so we can just acknowledge you? This is our Roosevelt team. And so things the district is doing well. We've invited Mr. Lopez to be part of the committee that is rewriting the ethnic studies course so that it can be A through G approved by the Office of the President, and it can be offered to everyone. Right now, we have about 2,500 students taking ethnic studies in the system. That's at 43 different schools. And it is today an option, but we are moving towards where it becomes a requirement, right? We also know that at places like Garfield, they are including it in the history class. In places where there's ganas, like at Bravo, they're including it in the literature class. So one, we come to you as a partner in lifting our narrative and telling, and really, you know, I love the Chicano praxis, right? The meeting of theory and practice. And how do we operationalize that so that a large system that was not built for our kids can be inspired to move towards interrupting poverty instead of replicating it? So we bring with ourselves the mindset. Really, it is a decision, because we bring with ourselves the mindset that through ethnic studies, we can better know ourselves, and then we empower ourselves to engage more fully in the education system, in our society, where we want good jobs, good schools, safe parks, right? The agenda is still what folks walked out in 1968 about. We want more, we deserve better, we want to be part of the solution, and that path towards self-determination is something that is alive and well in the conversation about ethnic studies, but we are challenged. We are challenged because not every school has a Jorge Lopez who is willing to be himself as he engages with his Boyle Heights students to be their real selves. Because when we allow our students to speak, they often challenge us about the realities that are true for them that as a system we don't recognize, right? So we are learning to be trauma-informed. We are learning to be strengths-based. We are learning to really change our beliefs about the role in public education. And we are learning that when we work together, we do in fact interrupt poverty, and we create social mobility through education. So the good news for all of you is that still across all of the public sector, whatever is the challenge, education is always the solution. And like the fight here at UCLA, like the fight at the community college, that fight for who gets to decide who will fund what and who is participating in all of our sector, starting with registering to vote and moving all the way to running for office and showing up in the classroom. I will leave you with 2019 is not far away. We have the class of 2016 and 2029 in our K-12 system. And in LA Unified, where people have gotten involved and communities have been included in decisions, we have seen more students read and write, more students get to graduation. And as we move through implementing A through G and holding our students to a higher standard, because the world keeps asking that for them, we are really challenged. Today, if A through G, C or better kicks in, we go to 49% graduation instead of 70. Right? But what's a 70% graduation if we're not passing our classes and they're not rigorous? So here is our challenge, but I am completely confident that together we can keep creating more access and addressing our community's needs with success. Gracias.
Good morning. Good morning again. What I'm going to be spending my time talking about this morning is a study that I worked on with Dr. Patricia Gándara, who is, of course, a faculty member here in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. She unfortunately couldn't be here today, but she has been, she was the principal investigator of the study, Making Education Work for Latinas in the U.S. And I wanted to give you just a little bit of context about this study. It was really the product of this collaborative relationship between Dr. Gándara and the Eva Longoria Foundation. The Longoria Foundation has kind of spearheaded several programs and efforts to increase success of Latina students and moving more students from high school and into college. And so I mentioned the Longoria Foundation, who commissioned this report, because along with the foundation and the efforts of Eva Longoria, we have gotten some really amazing resources to capture the voices and the faces of Latina students. Thank you. Of Latina students in California. And so for me, that was one of the reasons that the study was really powerful, was because we see and we hear the stories of these young women. And that's the piece of the report that I'm going to focus on today. I should mention, this report was also conducted by, on behalf of the Civil Rights Project, who Dr. Gandara is the co-director of, along with Dr. Gary Orfield, and took the lead on putting this report together. So I wanted to start with the educational pipeline to provide some context to this discussion. The educational pipeline you'll see in the research report that you were given is there, but I wanted to walk you through to how we read this pipeline, right? It's based on 2012 data, and it breaks down the educational pipeline for the 5 major racial ethnic groups in the United States. So if we begin with white students, who are the highest attaining group in the educational pipeline, we start with 100 elementary school students entering education. And out of those 100, we have 92 women and 91 men that are graduating with a high school degree, right? Pretty good graduation rates for white students. We have about 32 women, which is the first number, and 33 men graduating with a bachelor's degree. 12 women and 13 men who are graduating with a master's degree or equivalent. And we have about 1 woman and 2 men out of those 100 elementary school students who are graduating with a doctoral degree. Now, if we look at Asian American students, we see that there's some similar, significant amount of students are graduating at the high school level. We actually have more bachelor's degrees and higher education attainment for Asian American students than white students. But I have to really quickly say a caveat about this data is that this data is not disaggregated by ethnic subgroup of Asian Americans. And so if we were to disaggregate this data, there would be vast disparities between Southeast Asians, for example, and other Asian student groups. Now, if we look at the African American student pipeline, out of those 100 students, we see still the majority of students are graduating with high school degrees. But then when we get into higher education degrees, we can see that there's a great disparity in higher education attainment for African Americans. And for Native Americans, we can see the same pattern. The majority of those graduating high school with, again, significant disparities in higher education attainment. Now, if we look at the Latina and Latino educational pipeline, we begin with those 100 students, and we see that there's about 63 women and 60 men graduating from high school. About 13 women and 11 men are graduating with a 4-year degree. 4 Latinas and 3 Latinos graduating with a master's degree or equivalent. And when we get to doctoral attainment, we're really talking about less than half, right? Less than half of a person, if we talk about this in terms of people, right, that are graduating with a doctoral degree in the Latino educational pipeline. And so I just wanted to highlight here across in high school completion and in 4-year degree completion, Latinas, although that they are faring a little bit better than their male counterparts than Latinos, is that this group is still the lowest attaining for both high school level and college level, which are the 2 segments of the pipeline that this report focuses on. So what do we know about Latinas in the US? We know, and this data reflects, that about 1/3 of Latina students don't finish high school with their class. We know that 1 out of every 4 female students across the nation are Latina. We know that the majority of all female students in the states of California, Texas, and New Mexico are Latina. And finally, we know, and this is really significant, that a mother's educational attainment is a key predictor for their child's educational attainment. And so when we look at the numbers of Latinas and Latinos graduating with 4-year degrees, we see that this is an alarming statistic, right? When we know that children will most likely follow the educational attainment or close to the educational attainment of their mothers. And so if we focus in then on BA attainment, we also need to provide some context to the total population, right, in the United States to contextualize that attainment data. And so these are called parity charts, and this is another visual that's included in your report.
And in this chart, we're looking at percentage of students aged 25 and older across the United States that have earned bachelor's degrees by race and ethnicity. And so again, we're looking at the 5 major racial ethnic groups. And so we begin with the highest attaining group, which are white students. And so whites are about 67% of the total population across the US. Yet about 75% of those earning their share of bachelor's degrees, right? So if we reach parity with this graph, those bars should be relatively equal, right? Now, if we look at the BA attainment of Latinos compared to the population, about 12% of the population in the US is Latino. But about 6% of those are earning bachelor's degrees, right? And we see some of the similar patterns for African American students. Asian American students, again, are earning higher degrees at higher rates in terms of bachelor's degrees. And Native Americans are also earning bachelor's degrees at very low levels. And so what this data is telling us is that there is an overrepresentation of BA attainment for white students in the United States, and that's this bar on the right is a bit higher. And what we see is there is severe underrepresentation of Latinos earning bachelor's degrees. So in order to reach parity, right, in terms of bachelor's degree attainment, Latinos would have to increase BA attainment by 2-fold, right? And so considering mother's educational attainment and looking at the numbers of Latinos earning degrees compared to the total US population, this data is very concerning. So what I'm going to be focusing on today, and the reason that I'm talking a little fast, I'm going to try to slow down a bit so you can understand me, is because I really want to highlight the stories of these women. And again, we were able to capture video interviews with these women, and it was really hearing their stories that for me was the most powerful part of this study, and learning what works for them, right? So our case study participants included 7 women included in these case studies that represented each segment of public higher education in California: the California Community College system, the California State University system, and the University of California. And so I wanted to introduce them to you briefly because you're going to be hearing from almost each one of them. Vanessa was a California Community College student. She grew up in South Los Angeles. She was a 3rd-year student at her institution, and she was majoring in child development. Vanessa, and you'll hear her talk later, also became a mother in high school, and she has made it to the community college and has earned, eventually now, she has earned her degree. Alina was also at the community college. She grew up in Lawndale, California in the South Bay. She was a 3rd-year psychology major. Lisette, this is Lisette. Lisette was a California State University student. She grew up in East Los Angeles. She was a 3rd year, and she was a mechanical engineering major. Eva is our next student, and Eva was born in Guerrero, Mexico. She was raised, though, in Santana and lived the majority of her life in Santana. She was a 3rd year, and she was a double major in sociology and human development. Now, Alejandra was our youngest student. She was in her 1st year at Cal State. She was born and raised in Santana, and she was a kinesiology major. Andrea was born in Jalisco, Mexico. She grew up in the United States for the majority of her life. She lived, her family moved a lot, so she moved to Wisconsin from Jalisco. She spent quite a bit of time in Utah, which is where she called her home, and she currently resides in the Bay Area. She is a graduate of the UC, and she majored in political science. And the final participant is Karina. Karina grew up in Rubidoux in the Inland Empire just east of us. She was a 4th year psychology major. And so you're going to be hearing from each one of these women in the presentation today. So we know the challenges that these women and so many other young Latinas face. Some of these challenges, and the research tells us this, right, that most Latinas and Latinos are attending poor resource segregated schools. There's a lack of caring teachers in those schools and relationships with caring teachers. Often they are academically underprepared for college level coursework. They have limited college information in their schools. They experience racial and gender discrimination. And finally, 2 of the women included in this study were undocumented, and so that status, of course, presents greater barriers and challenges to academic access and success. But what we wanted to do in this study, and what the Longoria Foundation was the reason the LaGuardia Foundation commissioned this report is because we know so much about challenges and barriers in the lives of Latina students. We really wanted to know, okay, so what works? What can we learn from these very amazing, resilient students? And so for the purposes of time, I don't have time to highlight all of the themes that we found. I wanted to highlight just a few for you. The full report you can find both on the Civil Rights Project website and as well as the Eva Longoria Foundation website. But I'm going to begin with a theme that we found, and that was how critical family influence was on beginning and maintaining college aspirations. And we're going to begin with Lisette, who is going to tell us some of her story.
For as long as I can remember, since I was in kindergarten, my parents just told me, maybe I didn't even know exactly what college was. You know, they would say it in Spanish, la universidad, but I just knew that it was something I had to do and I was gonna do because that would make me have a better future.
I remember going with my sister to Dominguez Hills so she can probably just to buy books or to go to counseling offices, but I remember her giving me like a tour of the school and showing me like, oh, like this is a library, this is where you get your books, and this is where my classes are at.
We're always given books, and we're always encouraged to read. My parents read, more my mom, but we were always encouraged to do well in school, and we were praised for doing well.
My plans in terms of school was go to university, and I wanted to become a pediatrician. When I found out I was pregnant, everything kind of went blank. I didn't know what I was going to do, but my husband was like, no, I'm gonna work, you're gonna go to school, and you're gonna be someone in life.
So Vanessa, the last participant, she was amazing. She talked about how both her and her spouse had a child at a very young age in high school, and they both had college aspirations, but her and her husband made a decision that she was going to go into higher education first, get her degrees, and then he was going to continue to work to support the family, and then it was going to have his turn, right, to begin at the community college and gain his degree. And so many of these women talked about how they always knew they were going to go to college one day, and whether those aspirations came from parents, whether they came from siblings, in Vanessa's case they came from a spouse, right? They always knew that they would go to college, and that there were specific practices that they could describe that happened in their homes that supported those aspirations. Being read to, spending quality time with family on the weekends to talk about issues and challenges that were coming up, and to devise strategies to work through those challenges. And what was really interesting is that the women also actively participated in each other's lives with their family members, right? So family became the central support of a place where aspirations were maintained. Now, the next finding that I'll highlight is the significance of Latino teachers, which speaks to some of what Board Member Garcia was describing. So yes, it's important for teachers to be caring generally, but it was also very important that these teachers were also Latino. And so we'll share some of these experiences from the women as well.
I remember the teacher I had that year, his name was Mr. Garcia. He was a Hispanic teacher. And he would really encourage me, he would push me. Like, you would have like those reading tests that they would make you do in the classroom. And you know, he would always tell me like, oh, you got 90 words last time in 1 minute, let's see if you could do more this time, like things like that.
My AP Spanish teacher in high school was very supportive of me, and she was very encouraging, and she was the one that also talked to me about going to college. My parents felt more welcomed by her, and they felt like they were being more involved in my education. And I guess just because she spoke Spanish, and she also came from an immigrant parent background, and she was a teacher now.
My counselor was Mr. Pina, and he was Hispanic, and I felt like I bonded more with him. He was born in Mexico as well, and I just felt like they had a lot of things in common with my parents and his parents. How he started off in a low-income family. He just worked himself up, and he's a counselor, and he said he was doing really well with his life, and he's proud of where he was at, and I hope I can be the same way one day too.
So these educators, these Latina and Latino educators in the lives of these young women, they served as institutional agents and they served as role models, but they also served as these very critical sources of support and encouragement and information, right, that propelled them through their high school experiences and transitions to college, which is important for any teacher, right, is to provide those resources. But there was also feeling this cultural connection to their teachers that enabled them to see themselves in these other Latina and Latino professionals. That was very important. The third theme that I thought was really interesting was the significance of high school mathematics courses, having access to advanced mathematics and having support to do well in those classes. And so Lisette is going to start talking about her experience and is really where she began to develop aspirations to become a mechanical engineer.
My ninth grade year in the summer, I took summer school for geometry to advance because my teacher saw that, I was good at math. I started off my ninth grade year with trigonometry, and then from there I went on to pre-calculus and then calculus, AB and BC.
And there was 4 women in our AP calculus class, and in a class of probably like 20. And those were the kids who all wanted to do engineering. And all the women, we all sat together and we all supported each other through math, and it was very important to have that support group of just women, even though there wasn't many of us.
So having access to these high-level math courses was really a key element in placing these women along a college pathway that then opened up other opportunities to more advanced courses in their high school careers. The next theme, second to last theme that I'll describe is extracurricular involvement. And so all of the women were involved in extracurricular activities. Interestingly, it was mostly in athletics. And so they weren't only involved in these activities, but often took leadership roles in whatever these groups were in terms of the extracurricular activities that they were involved.
Being in the soccer team helped me through my high school, because that was kind of my motivation, because if you wanted to be in the team, you had to have good grades. So first semester I had straight A's. Second semester I'll get some B's, but still A's. I think even though if I wouldn't have had the soccer team, I still would have had good grades, but not as good, because, maybe I would have just gone home and watched a novela or something,
Being part of the sports team in cross country, it influenced me with school a lot because it kept me busy. And so my time management, I always had to deal with that. It kept me on track with, doing my homework assignments and making sure I didn't fall behind with work.
I was really involved in orchestra. It was my pride and joy, and by the time I was a senior, I got a National Orchestra Award, which was very encouraging at the end of the year. And so we were the ones really leading the orchestra. We had to set the example, and we used to tune everybody now. I didn't realize then, but those were leadership skills that I learned and I attained just from playing music, and it was something I just really, really enjoyed.
So Andrea played something like 5 different instruments, and she was also part of, there once was, I don't know if it's still here, a folklorico group here at UCLA. She was also a leader in this group. So these extracurricular activities kept these women on a college pathway because being in these activities meant that they had to keep their grades up in order to continue to participate, right? They learned skills to be academically successful, and they gained important leadership skills, as Andrea mentioned, becoming the leaders of these group of mostly other women, right? And so it allowed them to excel in the performance of either music or athletics. So it became a source of real empowerment, right, for these women involved in these activities as well. So the final theme that I wanted to highlight was one of the most powerful for me as I was conducting these interviews, is that of community advocacy and hope, is maintaining these hopes and dreams not only for themselves, but for their families and of their communities.
I kind of have like this vision where I not only want to make myself self-sufficient, but I would also want to help other people in my community be self-sufficient.
I've struggled a bit coming from a low-income community, where a lot of times students don't finish high school or just finish high school but don't go on to college. So for me, going back and giving back and showing others, especially students, that don't have that in mind, or don't have that support sometimes at home, if you have that motivation and you're determined to continue on with your education, then it's possible.
If you're educated, maybe then your son will be like, hey, like my mom went to college, she went somewhere, I'm gonna do the same, Like with me, with my mom, she didn't go to college or school, so I kind of thought, let me try to do what she didn't do, but my son's gonna say, let me do what my mom did.
So what was really amazing about Vanessa is that she, for me, counters this myth of Latinas becoming parents early on, right, and just forgetting about school or not caring about school. And in fact, through her story, we learned that having her son became a motivation for her to continue on to higher education, so that her son could one day see that his mom earned a college degree, so should I, right? So these high aspirations really translated to community advocacy. The meaning of success for these women was really intricately tied to the advancement of their families and communities, which is another powerful finding from this study. So in terms of recommendations moving forward, there were quite a few. I'm just going to highlight a couple that I highlighted through these stories. We really need to outreach to Latino parents and families, and I think Board Member Garcia also mentioned this, to validate and support their power. So they have a tremendous amount of power to influence their daughters' education. We need to, of course, recruit and retain more amazing Latino educators like those in the audience today. We need to emphasize the importance of math early in the education of Latina and Latino students, and we really need to think about developing effective pedagogical strategies that make math engaging and fun, right? It was really interesting for many of these women. They got to about middle school and they felt that they were good in all subjects, and it was middle school as this critical transition point where they began to feel that they were really struggling in math. So although they did advance to these high-level courses, it wasn't easy, right? And many of them did struggle. But we need to think about how we can improve pedagogical strategies around mathematics in particular. We need to allow and encourage opportunities for a variety of extracurricular activities for young Latinas. And finally, build on the resilience and hope and aspirations of these women. And if we can devise strategies to do this, then we ensure that these aspirations, the hope for their future, for their families, their communities, will eventually materialize. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm very glad I'm here with you today. I've tried to come to most of these summits and been involved in a lot of the reports that have been written. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a manuscript that I have under review that my work specifically looks at how racialized masculinities and femininities evolve and from discourse and into practice along the Latino educational pipeline. And so for many years I've been working on looking at Latino males specifically. And so I'm sharing some thoughts that I have from a manuscript that's under review that's speaking to a lot of the policies and discussions that we're having around men and boys of color. As we know, there's been a lot of attention called to this. And so part of what my paper is about is discussing, is a Chicana feminist talkback to some of the problems that we're having and with these discussions that I feel are important for us to highlight if we really want to address this issue of Latino male educational attainment and so forth. And so as I argue that in my paper that policymakers up to, from Obama down are arguing that we have a men and boys of color problem. And so my paper argues that we don't really have this problem, nor do we have really a problem that's solely focused on the hypermasculinity of Black and brown men. What we really have essentially is a patriarchy problem. And that is very much missing from all of our discussions as we trickle that down to policy and practice. So For those of you who have been in the loop, we know that Obama called for an initiative called My Brother's Keeper last February of 2014. And similarly, California has had these discussions prior, initiating initiatives around boys and men of color. There's an alliance for boys and men of color that include state agencies, many governmental actors, nonprofit organizations, and they've done really great work through research, through practice, and conversations, especially conversations around trauma and health of young men of color. And so many scholars have kind of come and activists, especially women of color activists, have come out speaking about some of the problems with some of the discussions that we're having. Not that all these organizations and efforts are problematic, but that there's been an absence of this discussion, that this is not a new problem. This is something that has, and that's what I'm going to share with you, and that's what my paper goes over, is how I did a content analysis of a lot of initiatives that have come out since the early 1900s, specifically talking about immigrant youth of color, including white ethnics at the beginning of last century up till today. And in my paper, I discuss how this discourse hasn't really changed. The technologies of oppression have changed. And that's what we need to be strategic about. And unless we really address an issue of patriarchy, we are not really going to make any changes in this so-called crisis. And so part of what folks argue, especially with these initiatives like My Brother's Keeper, is that if we have a gender-exclusive conversation without a discussion of patriarchy and how it particularly affects people of color, we minimize the consequences of structural inequalities that affect, in our case, Latinos generally, with two competing narratives. One is that it characterizes male levels of achievement as a reflection of their own failings. It reinforces the relative silence about Latinas and that they are faring well. And I'll show you this through an example of how Black women are also omitted from discussion and the repercussions of that in my next slide. The other suggests that racism targets Latino men especially and acknowledges the role of racism, but it narrows the scope of its impact on Latinos in general, especially women. And so the convergence of these narratives creates a research and policy environment inhospitable to those who understand educational disparity as a legacy of unwarranted racial power with consequences for both men and women. And so in response to My Brother's Initiative and other initiatives around surrounding boys and men of color, we see a response from a lot of folks. And so this hashtag here that says "Why We Can't Wait" specifically addresses the omission of Black women in these discussions. And so here you see something like my brothers and I have always standed together. We are a community, and communities progress together. And so this policy environment that narrows and these responses are disproportionately subjected to zero tolerance policies, high stakes testing, crumbling public school infrastructures, and curricular choices that fail to meet minimum requirements for their state's most selective institutions. These are conditions that undermine achievements and opportunities for both boys and girls. And so in my work, I raised the question of how can we do research and then talk about policy and practice in a way that addresses symbolic forms of violence across these spectrums and how it affects boys and girls differently, but under similar systems of oppression. And so in the work that I did specifically for this paper, I looked at how, as I mentioned, patriarchy is the problem. So today we have this issue that, and sorry, it's very kind of loud and, a little offensive, but that's what I do. That's how I am. I don't hide it ever. And so we have this picture that shows us, part of how this problem is discussed in the media, in educational circles, that informs things like zero Thank you, board member. Zero tolerance policy. But as I mentioned, this isn't new. So this is a picture that comes out of Miroslava Chavez Garcia's book, States of Delinquency, that looks at young boys, specifically Mexican boys, that attended the Nell School at the turn of the early 19th century. It was a reformatory school where boys were sent to, subjected to IQ testing, sometimes subjected to sterilization. And if you look at the discourse about how these young men are talked about, it's not so different about how young men of color are talked about today. And when you look at how, and the content analysis I did of these programs, if you look at how many of these organizations, policy agent and other agents talk about, it's again, it really reduces the problem to cultural values, right? It's very much rooted in culturally deficit thinking. The way that they frame the problem, the way that they execute their policy, the way and practice, and the everyday interactions that they have with young men. And so all of these conversations are in absence of a really thorough and structural analysis of patriarchy. And so a lot of our research on Latino men, I didn't put data here, but I tried to sum it up, tells us that Latino boys have a lower interest in studying, and they don't necessarily ask for help. They have high rates of suspension, disability classification, and are less likely to be targeted or classified as gifted and talented. And in terms of their aspirations, the research summarizes that Latino boys have lower educational goals and a less optimistic future outlook than their Latina counterparts. And in terms of their trajectories, they are more likely to be pushed out of school, as the pipeline shows, and traced into low-paying work. And so, as I keep reiterating, this isn't new. This is what has always been occurred. However, it's been spotlighted as a crisis, that we have a crisis of hypermasculinity. And so here I want to highlight something that Danny shared with me when I was a graduate student of a teaching magazine that was supposed to show mostly Anglo teachers how the cultural values. So here I'm highlighting that whenever we talk about this crisis of Latino students, it's very much deduced to their cultural values and how their cultural values don't align with what is expected from them at school, and hence this is why they fail. And we also have to take note of how much these values, this language is very much coded and gendered. Right, gendered at the same time as much as it is racialized. And so I'm just going to go over a couple. In this magazine, it shows certain concepts that are to be found in school, how Anglo families, what their values are, what Mexican American values are, and this is from the 1970s. I don't know if I said that, and how then a teacher who is not from this community, who has not worked with these students, is what they're expected to find. And what I want you to think about is how much have we evolved since then, as teachers, as educators, as policymakers, and even as our own students, as they're seeing themselves. And so I'm just going to highlight a couple. So for example, when it talks about the role of the father, the research, or this manual tells teachers that in the Mexican American home, there's machismo, that the father is dominant, and that in the classroom, for the most part, these students are going to miss male authority, and especially looking at the teaching force at this time, mostly white female teachers, right? And so this is what you're expected to find. And we know that this is conceptualized and perceived and reinforced with consistent media images that we see of our families and of our youth. And this is translated into research and practice and how we train teachers. And how teachers come in with certain, many teachers and other school agents come in with these perceptions that is matched up with these other factors, such as police coming into schools and working with our students. This other value here that shows us the home environment, it highlights that these youth, male and female, but very much coded, especially on males, is that they often have aggressive behavior. They lack necessary experiences for conceptual development. And hence here, their views on education is that they're apathetic in school. There's few successful experiences and may become a dropout. And so what I want to call to attention is raising the questions about how we're training our teachers, right? How we're training our teachers as not just culturally about who these communities are, but also how these things become coded as race and gendered practices. In the work that I've done with Latino males over time, this very much becomes apparent as they grow up in terms of how they're experiencing their interactions with teachers, with school officials, and even in their own communities, and how then they start to internalize and also react to these labels. And so a lot of these young men start to build very low aspirations when they have things like personal problems in schools, personal family issues, as many of us do, and they start to lag behind instead of a teacher really kind of understanding the context, as we saw in the recent video of what happened in South Carolina with the young female who had just lost her parents, was in foster care, etc., was having a very bad day, was being defiant, that had to be probably addressed, but not in the way that we saw it being addressed. But many times what I saw in the research that I did with young men is when they had personal issues such as experiencing poverty, family separation, divorce, deportation, instead of asking what's going on, let me talk to your parents, it falls into that culturally deficit rubric of, is probably going to become a dropout, right? It's not just an issue, right? The student becomes erased, right? The student becomes part of a cultural paradigm that this is expected, this is what's supposed to happen anyway, rather than there being a critical intervention and an understanding about what that young person is facing. And so when we're thinking about things like policy and practice, I like to follow Richard Valencia's model about what inequity looks like in our schools. And so he says that we have to take into consideration these institutional processes and the personal attitudes or cultural values of actors. And so this together has serious effects and outcomes. And so if we really want to talk about this so-called crisis about Latino males, we have to really unpack what patriarchy is, how it's not addressed in our curriculum. So we're at a critical point of implementing things like ethnic studies. But if you look at ethnic studies curriculum, and I've taught in Chicano studies, when we talk about gendered issues, they're very peripheral, right? It's, let's talk about Chicanas week 10. Right? Then we'll talk about patriarchy. These things, let's talk about LGBT folks week 11, right? If we get to it. And so these are conversations that we have to have integrated in our curriculum throughout. If we're talking about irrelevant pedagogy, we have to talk about patriarchy as much as we have to talk about racism, classism, and other forms of issues. And this is the absence of what I find in a lot of the organizations and the folks that work with these youth, is not challenging patriarchy for the fear of also coming off as culturally deficit against Latino cultures. But in general, like I said, it's not an issue of hypermasculinity within Black and Latino cultures. It's an issue of patriarchy and how that becomes transcended into just being an issue of Latino and Black male and their cultures. And so we have to look at these issues of how we're addressing this at meso levels of policy, when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to standardized testing. How do these young men see their lives, their gendered lives, as much as their race and class lives? And the micro interactions between students, between teachers. When I was a gender education program coordinator, I saw many times, very heteronormative, heterosexist language that wasn't addressed by the mentors and the actors or really discussed. They were peripheral to the overall agenda of trying to have these young men see just issues, really structural issues deduced to just racism and classism. And that's what I want to basically leave us with.
I guess we have a chance for maybe one or two questions. If anybody has a question, and there's a mic up here if you want to come up to the mic, because we have to make a quick transition to the next panel. But anyone? Yes. I'm not sure if you need the mic, but
I'll ask from here. So Maria, I was just wondering, So, two questions. One, I noticed that they had the Mexican American, separated from Chicano, and I wondered if they talked about why that separation happened, and if you're kind of doing an analysis around that. And two, that just like, I hear the patriarchy critique, and I think it's really important. I think it's often left out. But are we saying that patriarchy in the Chicano community or amongst men of color is reason why they're faring less, or is it patriarchy across the country, patriarchy in our society in general that leads men who are trying to be loyal to patriarchy, they end up failing in patriarchy, in other words, I think. I think that's one of the things that I'm kind of hearing, but I want to know if that's the way you see it.
Yeah, so in terms of the slide, I can't find the original, so I'm not sure how they come to that. So I'm guessing it's like Mexico. Again, it's 1970s, these operations, the chart, isn't really defined. So I'm not really clear on what, and so they're probably also appropriating some of the language at the time of like, oh, these are the youth are Chicanos, right? But the families.
It's getting worse in the chart. If that's what
Yeah. So this is what happens, and this is what you're going to expect in your classroom. But to answer your second part of what I'm trying to argue it, and I have a very hard time articulating at times without trying to have having my argument deduced to very culturally deficit arguments. But I'm arguing we have a structural problem of patriarchy, but many times it's deduced to what's wrong with Black men, what's wrong with Latino men, and so we need to have these kind of dual conversations. Be very real about, yes, patriarchy exists in our communities. If we are looking at Chicano communities, it's not just the patriarchy, or Latino communities, it's not just the patriarchy that we experience, that it's racist and sexist in the United States, of how we're framed as Latino males, but also, how do sometimes how does our culture also teach us patriarchy, right? And so we need to have these very critical discussions. And so many times when I look at organizations or folks that want to work with youth, it's that conversation isn't there. Right? The conversation isn't there. For example, I was in an organization, participating in an organization many years ago, where the young men were talking about their mothers, especially single mothers, as these victims, right? As victims. And then they were having these very horrible conversations about women. Right, and so about the women that they're dating, and there was no intervention of having those discussions, right? So if we really want to just address an issue of patriarchy, we need to have those critical conversations and make those links to structural issues of inequality, but not just leave it at cultural values, or not just leave it as, oh, we're stigmatized as men of color, we're more targeted by police, etc. But how do we also perpetuate, how do we also kind of resolve these issues within our own communities without excluding those structural conversations? I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? Yes.
I have a question for Monica Garcia about the curriculum. Would it be only based in California, or maybe do you see it in another 20 or 30 years nationwide?
Do I see the need for ethnic studies?
No, as in maybe striving for the ethnic studies, not only maybe in California, but nationwide, so in every state.
So I think we know the population of people of color continues to grow, and it is something that everyone has to be learner about, and systems have to learn, right? So these two presentations really speak to the scholarship piece that doesn't automatically translate into the policy piece, right? So do I see us needing to all learn more about each other? The answer is yes. Do I see the country moving in that direction? Not right now, but I'm an optimist, so we will. It really depends around people taking an active leadership role across the board. So you see it right now along the coasts and in the South, but the real heart of the United States in the middle, there's a conversation.
Follow up?
So kind of leads to another question. These talks, you know, they should kind of be also targeting not not just faculty, but maybe community, non-university, you know. So like maybe these talks, should they be held in a, you know, bigger auditorium, focused on maybe not just high school students, but maybe elementary school students?
So I'm not going to speak for the organizers, but I think I was invited for the K-12 perspective. And I want to say that you're right about we have to do this over and over and over again. I, for one, am pleased that this conversation takes place at UCLA, because it's really important that UCLA accepts this part of their responsibility in impacting multiple systems, right? And you're right, when UCLA has a school in Pico Union, Koreatown area, the K-12 Bruin School, and that I think got more people accepted to UCLA than any other place. But the idea is that we have, for the Latino community and for some of educational justice, social justice, economic justice, we have to make the bridges happen, and it is in our best interest for that to be so. If everybody wants to stay in their place, then we perpetuate what does not work for our folks. Right? So we need to have, you're absolutely right, that's why I said we have the class of 2029 in our system today. And so our decisions and our actions and whether or not we address some of these questions absolutely have an impact on that.
One last question.
Well, I'm actually going to, I don't think we have time for any more questions. What I'm going to suggest is that we have a concluding session at 4:30 at the end of the day today. So if there are additional questions, please note them down so you don't forget them. And this session is actually dedicated to a Q&A for any of the presenters that had a chance to present today. So I want to be respectful of time also for our second panel. So we're going to take a quick 2-minute break and transition to our second panel. So thank you.
I don't know what to do about it, but it's good. It's good. It's very good.
So I'm working with the organization, especially out my for Asian American it's kind of funny. Yeah, we got hard to get through it, but he's kind of like. Kind of.
Really?
Some of us. For real. You don't mind. It's that space that I look at culture, as being like, well, I'm not going to work with you. It's more like, this is my little circle, and you said this is my little circle, this is my little circle. I think that I don't want to blame you on him for the status like that, but I think that and then when I was like, what's up, this little moment? He's like, yeah, cool. But I'm doing my little thing. It's kind of like I guess I had like an independent consultant for like hours. I get to come in here. I get to like the presence on my where and then right now too, head of my life, like I should kind of like it's called like a Jedi evaluation exercise. So pretty much it's like the people of color underrepresented in the evaluation. Here at grad student, they get to learn how to do evaluations. So I got the internship right for the whole year. It's executive internship with divided up to like 4 different topics of evaluation. They train me, they do evaluation projects. So I'm doing an evaluation of like what they're like. So it kind of develops, you know, it's kind of like it's like a guy. So I Only saw people That's what we were talking about right now. I'm like, yeah, like, look. Like, one arm of me is in the program or what? You out of the program or what?
I mean, I paid for it. You're like, I'm a complete person.
I know, I'm like,
Are they also
There's a button on the microphone. On the.
Hello? Okay. Thank you, everybody. We're going to be starting our second panel of the day. If I could ask for everyone to take their seats. So I would like to introduce our second panel of the day focused on increasing Latino community college student success. In order of presentations, we have Dr. Carola Y. Suarez Orozco, who is the co-director of the Institute for Immigration, Globalization, and Education, and also, of course, a professor of education here at the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. And the title of her presentation is Opportunities for Latino Community College Students, Immigrant Origin and Community College Students. Our second presenter is Roberto Gonzalez. He is the Dean of the Student Success Initiatives program at Santa Monica College, and his presentation will be the Student Success Initiative and Latino Community College Student Success. And finally, we have Dr. Nancy Acevedo Gil, who is an assistant professor in the Doctoral Studies program at Cal State San Bernardino, and the title of her presentation will be Developmental Education for Latino Community College Students. So thank you so much to our panelists for joining us and having an engaging discussion about the community college. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much, Lindsay and Danny, for organizing such an extraordinary and important event. 10 years, this is extraordinary. And I'm deeply honored to be able to participate in this conversation. So I love the title of the day, Sites of Possibilities, and I'm delighted to be able to address community colleges as a site of possibility. It is, I think of them truly as sites of possibilities, although sometimes they disappoint us. And I want to talk a little bit about how both the challenges as well as the possibilities and how we can try to work to maximize possibilities. I want to, in the spirit of confession, I want to say that I'm a product of community colleges. My husband a product of community colleges. Some of my so many of my Latino students over the years, many of my immigrant students at Harvard, at NYU, and at UCLA have first started in community colleges. And you know, we've gone to a one-car house and Marcelo took the car today, and so I took an Uber on the way here, and I always engage in conversations with whoever I'm with, and it would, not surprising, it was an immigrant from this time from Vietnam, and he was telling me how he just finished community college. He's now in state college. His sister just went to community college, went to state college, just finished her master's in public health at UCLA, and now has a job in Hawaii. So, you know, there's story after story after story about how extraordinary the possibilities, how they are sites of possibilities. At the same time, there's lots to worry about. So I'm going to I wanted to start on the sites of possibilities. I will talk about the challenges in the middle of my talk, and then I'll end on sites of possibilities, because I am basically also, as a previous speaker, an optimist at heart. So, and I'm also trying to give 3 talks in 15 minutes, so forgive me if I sound like a New Yorker, and I will talk very fast. I lived there 10 years. I'm not really a New Yorker, but I'm a code switcher. All right, so community colleges are a first stop for well over half of all U.S. students, U.S. college students, well over half. This is especially true for non-traditional students. That includes first-generation to college students, racial and ethnic minorities, immigrant origin students, and undocumented students. All different groups, but sometimes they're in Venn diagrams, to use an educational term. Their enrollment is steadily increasing, but unfortunately completion rates are also dropping. And this is especially dismal, unfortunately, for Latino students. I'm going to now talk a little bit about the challenges of immigrant origin students. 2/3 of Latinos are immigrant origin, either first or second generation. Clearly, there are Latinos that have been here for 15 generations, much longer than the white mainstream, but 2/3 of Latinos can trace themselves within 2 generations. So let me talk a little bit about the particular challenges that immigrant origin students face. They have higher than average rates of poverty, They often juggle multiple roles, including working concurrently as well as family roles and long commutes. Many are still in the process of gaining language, English language skills, particularly academic English. Their academic preparations are not always optimal because often they've attended less than optimal schools, secondary schools, primary and secondary schools before they transfer to college. Many have undergone family separations during the process of immigration. Some live under the shadow of undocumented status. Many are stigmatized and invisible. And all too often they encounter settings that are unprepared, unwilling, or struggle to meet their needs as they enter the college. So, within the 4-year college literature, there's a very clear understanding that student level variables plus setting level variables equals academic outcomes, right? The two together, knowing the two together will predict how well people will do, by and large. Now, within the, Aston, Pascal and Terenzini, Tinto, and many others have put a lot of emphasis on the setting level, right? The setting level matters. It's why so many folks are spending, especially in the privileged class, are spending so much energy trying to get in those top 20 schools, right? It's why everybody wants to go to Harvard and their kin. So the institutional environment and the interpersonal climate in those settings is supposed to be where it's all at. And there's a clear recognition in the 4-year setting of that. And increasingly, there's an understanding that that's also true in the 2-year setting as well, but much more of the energy is spent on kind of blaming the student, worrying about the student, what's wrong with the students aren't ready, the students aren't prepared, we can't do much with the students because the students don't have the skills that they need. The students don't spend enough time on campus, the students commute, the students work, there's all these problems with the student. And what else, what are we to do? The reason we can't do well with them is because they have all these problems. I'm grossly exaggerating, but that's basically the way the problem is constructed much of the time. So I'm going to argue that we can complexify this issue a little bit, and maybe we can be thinking a little bit more about the setting at the 2-year college as well. So here's a more complicated diagram. I'm not going to walk you all through all of it today because we don't have time in 15 minutes to do it, but I'm going to very quickly walk you through it. And I'm gonna, where you see color emphasis is where we're gonna spend some time talking today, okay? So in gross, so in a quick picture, the outcomes are things like grades, persistence, college transfer, etc. On the left side, whoops, I can do this with a click, it doesn't work. Well, sort of works. Okay, so student level factors include the usual suspects: gender, age, ethnicity, first generation to college, etc. And I'm going to talk a little bit about documentation status. I'm going to spend 5 minutes on that per Lindsay's request, and financial resources. And then there's things like family responsibilities and work responsibilities, right? And then academic preparation. Clearly, that's going to matter. So those are student level factors. Then campus setting characteristics like campus climate and classroom quality are going to matter in my estimation. And I'm going to talk I'm not going to do so much here, but I'm going to talk about classroom quality because I think we need to be spending more attention here than we tend to in the 2-year narrative, than a community college narrative. And then social capital matters. I'll talk a little bit about this. And it adds up to student engagement, which all end up, when you put it all together, you get better outcomes. That's my argument, okay? You follow me? I did it really quickly, but if I had an hour, I could do more. Okay, all right, so now I've got, per Lindsay's request, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the role of undocumented status on student well-being and how it affects young students who live under this shadow. So with colleagues, we did a survey of 909 undocumented college students attending over 200 colleges across the country. The majority were in California. That's the secret. They just tended to be in California because I think they did tend to participate more, but they actually came from 35 states. They were ranging 18 to 30, mean age 21, 54% were female. They were attending, 42% were in community colleges, 50% in four-year publics, 4% in privates. And their average age of entry was just over 6 years of age. And these are the folks who made this possible. This is not a single person effort by any means. So we asked a lot of questions, but one of the core questions was putting together the quantitative data was trying to answer this, but we also had a qualitative question, which was an open-ended question that asked this: what are some of the challenges you face as an undocumented college student? So I'm going to very quickly give you some of the punchlines. We learned that 2/3 of the participants were the first in their families to attend college. This is not unique to community college students, for example, or immigrant origin students, but it's particularly high in this population. We learned that the vast majority were extremely concerned about paying tuition. And they were also, very concerned about such basic issues as paying for books or supplies. Many had limited access to financial aid and concerns about financing college, which led many of them to sell themselves short. So this quote gives you a sense of that. Some of them would be accepted to colleges that were a step above a community college, if you will, and they would start out in a community college because they simply couldn't afford the higher tier college. Most were working. Almost 3/4 were working at the same time. They would talk about juggling. I'm always tired because I'm working. There's no energy. I have 2 jobs, and then I'm scared I won't pass my classes. So clearly, if you're working, it's a little hard to spend as much time on your studies than if you're not. The vast majority indicated they had ongoing concerns about deportation, both for themselves and for their loved ones. This is true even for DACA recipients. And interestingly, the folks with DACA were even more concerned about the deportation of their parents than the ones without. So that worry went up. And many have been in the U.S. most of their lives, and yet they clearly long to belong to a nation that excluded them. So these quotes are very poignant and get right to the heart and the crux of it. Not having the same rights and benefits as my peers make me feel like a foreigner, even though I'm now closer to the U.S. culture than to my Mexican culture. I was raised here. It is my home sweet home. So why is it wrong for me to want to stay, serve, help, and work here? Wow. Okay, I'm going to have to move through this section and get to some of the other issues that I wanted to address. So I'm sorry. This is I love this part, but I'm going to have to move on. So I want to, one quick thing, anxiety levels was through the ceiling for this population, much, much higher than the norm population in which we had a measure against, 28% for males, 37% for females against the norm population. You see what it is. And the punchline that I'm not going to tell you about the study that I'm drawing the rest of the data from, but just let me say that it comes from a study of 3 campuses with 646 immigrant origin young people from the East Coast. So I'm going to just go through this, and you'll have to trust me on it. I'm sorry about the sources. It was a mixed method study. 3 campuses. Okay, sorry. And one of the findings was related to the anxiety finding is that almost none of the students used, and this is related to something you might be interested in, almost none of the students knew about campus counseling services. So only a quarter even knew about it, and they'd say things like, we're unfamiliar with, you know, the counseling center. What's that? Like free therapy or something? So, you know, it's like not something you knew about, and if they were going to go to anybody for help, they'd go to their friends or family. All right, I want to talk about classroom engagement. This is something that I think we need to be paying more attention to what goes on in the classroom. All right. We went about trying to develop a measure of systematically looking at what's going on in the classroom. What's the teaching like? What's happening in terms of relationships in the classroom? How are people thinking in the classroom? Is deep thinking going on? There really are no measures of that out there. So we went about developing a measure of that. So, for example, we had a measure of behavioral engagement, which is the degree to which class members engage in behaviors that reflect being appropriately on task in the classroom. Okay, so things like attentiveness, rule compliance, authoritative content, learning organization, classroom management. And we set up protocols to observe these. This is an example of an item. Okay, so these were an observational protocol. So anchored on one side, you know, people are inattentive, they're not even paying attention. On the other end, most of the students are leaning in, they're paying attention, right? So it's a protocol where we had really high inter-rater reliability. And we did that for behavioral engagement. Relational engagement is the degree to which members are relationally, you know, attached to one another, right? They're sort of feeling like they support one another. So a sample item is members on the negative end, they ignore each other, they're putting each other down, they're not in any way involved with one another. On the other end, members of the class praise each other, encourage each other, are, you know, like, you know, helping each other out. So we had high inter-rater reliability of that. Then we had cognitive engagement, which is things like the degree to which people engage in activities and discussion where they're really thinking, like really in the ideas, right? And again, we came up with a way to really think about this and do it systematically. And we came up with a really good measure, solid measure, based on 60 classrooms that we're really proud of and is under review. And what we learned is that, under advanced review, and we learned that there's promising evidence that this measures identifies 3 distinct but correlated dimensions of engagement. There's a way to observe this, and it's different. And they predict different levels of engagement across campuses where we expected differences. In other words, the campus where there was the best engagement, this really was a good predictor. So this objective measure worked in the way both in terms of our ethnographic measures, as well as we had a survey instrument. And the survey items also correlate with this. So that it's working is the exciting news. And then I would talk about microaggressions, but I don't have time. We also observed microaggressions, and they happen a lot. And they shouldn't, and it's a barometer of classroom climate. And when they happen a lot, guess what? Classroom engagement goes down. So that's the punchline on that one. And then I'm going to just say one last thing. Do I have 1 more minute? 2 more minutes? Ooh, okay. So I want to tell you social support matters, right? We know that. We know that from Rendon's work. We know that from Stan Salazar's work. We've always suspected that. So we developed a measure of instructional engagement. That was the one that correlated nicely with our observational measure. And we did it in a survey, and lo and behold, the Latino students who reported significantly higher in relationships at the campus where we thought it was going to happen. And then we did a regression where we tried to predict cognitive engagement, which is this thing about like being into the ideas, right? It's like when you're all leaning into an idea and you're going, does it matter? How does it matter? How does it relate to this other thing? It's that thing that we think the college matters for, right? Grades are good, degrees are good, but what you really want to do is make people think and learn to think and be curious and become lifelong learners. That's what it's about, right? So I've always thought cognitive engagement was the most important thing. ever. So we would try to come up with a model to predict that. So control variables, 7% of the variance, peer relationships, not that important. Really, that, like, I thought that was going to be important. Not that important, and that we can have a conversation about why isn't it as important as we would think it would be in a community colleges. That's another conversation. But here's what, instructor relations, that matters. That matters. And I have a couple of beautiful quotes that gives it to you, but we don't have time unless you read really quickly. And, you know, they matter. So my bottom line is, student level variables are not particularly mutable. Blaming the student is not particularly constructive. We need to pay more attention to classrooms because that's where we can actually make a difference. And there are ways to really systematically attend to these. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so I apologize in advance. I normally don't have the radio voice that I have now. I'm a little under the weather, so bear with me here. I'm hoping not to cough too much. So I'm Roberto Gonzalez. I'm the Dean of Student Success Initiatives at Santa Monica College. Just to kind of explain a little bit of what that means and unpackage it, I oversee our first year counseling center on campus, our Welcome Center, which has about 16,000 counseling contacts a year. So second busiest on campus. I oversee our first year experience program, which is our program really focusing on first-time freshmen coming from different high schools and helping them transition from high school to college and be successful during their first year and beyond at SMC. I also oversee our Hispanic Serving Institution Title V grant that established our Teaching and Learning Center. That's something maybe that you'd be interested in chatting later about. Really focusing on professional development for faculty to increase successful student outcomes, especially Latino students. So, been asked to go ahead and talk about the Student Success Initiative, or the Student Success Act of 2012. What I'm going to go ahead and do is just describe the act a little bit, how it came to be, and what the act is supposed to accomplish with our students, and then what some of the things that we're doing at Santa Monica to kind of help increase those successful student outcomes per the legislation. So, a little brief background. Before the Student Success Task Force got implemented, just as Carola was mentioning, there's been a lot of criticism and a lot of research studies that have shown just really how ineffective the community colleges have been system-wide to go ahead and help students reach or attain their educational goals. I think right before the budget crisis hit or a little after, you may remember, LA Times released different kind of really scathing kind of critiques at the community colleges in terms of taking 6 or 7 years for students to go ahead and get through to transfer. And then another, more time to go ahead and get their BA degrees. So with that said, the California Board of Governors for the community colleges went ahead and launched a task force in 2011 to go ahead and look at how the community colleges could address the really lack of degree attainment and the gaps in attainment and improve those success rates for the next decade. So in 2012, the 20-member task force went ahead and presented its recommendations to the Board of Governors. They accepted the recommendations, and then shortly thereafter, Governor Brown signed the Student Success Act of 2012 into law, SB 1456, Seymour Campbell Student Success Act. And with that really ushered in kind of a new era of change for the community colleges to really look at the core services in terms of students coming in, first-time freshmen coming in. And so the goal of the Student Success Act, otherwise known as SSSP, or the Student Success and Support Program, is really to help students as they're coming in with those core services. So the core services being assessment and placement, counseling and advisement, and also follow-up services for those students who are not doing so well in terms of academics. So in terms of the mandates, we have to go ahead and provide students with an abbreviated educational plan and a comprehensive educational plan or long-term educational plan. And the focus really is to helping students identify a major career and helping them to reach that trajectory or that educational goal. We have to provide orientation, assessment, placement, and other counseling services for all students, incoming students. And we have to help students go ahead and declare a major or area of study by the time they get to the 15th unit. And as I mentioned before, we have to provide follow-up services to those students that are classified as at-risk students. These are students that are in basic skills courses or pre-college level courses, students who haven't identified a major or career yet, and then students on probation, either academic or progress. To assist the community college to go ahead and kind of meet this mandate, funding came along with it because it always helps when you have funding to go along with mandates. So for the first year, we got about $74 million system-wide to go ahead and implement these changes, and every year it's really increased. $173 million the following year, and then this year it's been $173 plus a little bit more. So how does that look like at the district level for us at SMC? So for the first year, we got about $1 million to go ahead and provide these services. $3 million last year, and this year it looks like it was $3 million, but we just got an increase, so we have $6 million to go ahead and really make some changes. And then in addition to the Student Success and Support Program, we also get funding from the Chancellor's Office for Student Equity. That's another $1 million, and we don't know what the allocation is for this coming year. But really the point of the Student Equity Initiative is also to make sure that we're addressing those inequitable educational outcomes and making sure that, or at least as much as we can, helping reach parity in terms of those educational outcomes. So what impact, if any, are we going to see with the SSSP mandates and the funding that we're seeing? In my opinion, it's too early to tell. It depends on how the districts are going to go ahead and implement them, but the biggest thing is that we're going to expand student services to be able to provide those counseling services that are needed for students to get a sense of direction. When students come to college, they don't know how to navigate the system. They don't know what the terminology means, and so it's really getting the students oriented to, getting ready for the classroom, how to interact with faculty, because all of that is going to have an impact in terms of their success. But also what courses to take, so the students don't, spend too much time taking courses that are not related to their educational goal. And so essentially this will help them reach their educational goal. Currently, system-wide, we only have 62% of Latina or Latino students who entered the system in 2008-09 actually attained a degree or certificate within the 6-year period. So by the time we got to 13-14. So we still have a little ways to go in terms of seeing the success rates that we want to see from our Latina and Latino students. In terms of the counseling and the follow-up services, I can't stress that enough in terms of helping students really be connected to the campus. At Santa Monica, we have students that come from all over LA to come to Santa Monica because of the transfer reputation, #1 in transfer. Every year we transfer around 2,000 students to Cal States and UCs combined. And so the students are, in terms of a barrier, they're on a bus 2-3 hours at a time to come to us. And so that student engagement piece is important. So they have to connect with somebody on campus to really, motivate them to continue on with their studies. And a counselor definitely is somebody that can help with that. For us at the college, it's really sparked conversations about, okay, what services are we currently providing and what are some things that we could be doing that are different? And with each campus culture, change is the most difficult thing to do because, just because we've done something how we've always done it, people tend to kind of stick within that mindset or that mind frame. Santa Monica College has probably one of the highest, if not the highest, number of counselors on staff than any other community college. I want to say we're about 140 counselors. Some colleges don't even have academic counselors. And so that really has driven us to think of things a little bit differently. When it comes to educational planning, we have 30,000 students on campus. How are we going to get educational plans for 30,000 students? So it's really about thinking about scale. It's really about thinking about where to devote the resources, because at some point funding is going to go away. And so what are some things that we can institutionalize and be strategic about planning for helping students achieve their educational goals? In terms of educational planning, we created an online educational plan that all the counselors help out with to store the short-term educational plans and the long-term educational plans. That took quite a bit of effort and almost about a year in development. We've also expanded our assessment services for students, counseling services campus-wide. And so it's allowed us to do more things in terms of what we were already doing, but also helped us improve or create new programs, such as the First Year Experience Program, which is funded out of SSSP partly, and other funding sources. And so it's too early to tell, but we think that it's definitely going to be something positive for students. And in combination with the other initiatives, Student Equity, Basic Skills, which is aimed at helping pre-college level students succeed, it's really forced us to look at how we can take all these funding sources to really create one unified plan to help our students. Because the transfer rates that we have is only about 30% of students, or 30% of Latinos that started with us in 08, 09 actually transferred within a 6-year time frame, and that's too low. So we're working on it. Even us as the #1 transfer school, we still have areas of improvement. And so, we're looking at what's going to go ahead and that's research-based, that's going to help us, help our students. So.
All right, thank you everyone for being here. It's an honor to be here presenting. My first Latino Education Summit was in the 3rd annual, I believe, 3rd or 4th, must have been the 3rd, where I found out about it a few weeks earlier, and I was really considering the PhD program at UCLA, and I saw Danny Solorzano was involved, so one of my good friends, we said, hey, let's go. So we drove overnight, got here, drove from Oakland, got here, and we were so sleep deprived, much like I am today. But it was so exciting to be here, and now 7 years later, or however many years later, I'm back as an assistant professor in the doctoral studies program at Cal State San Bernardino. My name is Nancy Acevedo Gil, and today I'm going to be presenting a little bit about developmental education for Latino community college students, and I'm going to focus on California in particular. So we've talked about developmental education and basic skills throughout this presentation today, and what is developmental education, right? It aims to prepare students for college level courses. So when students come in to the community colleges and also the four-year colleges, they usually take an assessment to see if they're going to place at what level in math, what level of English, what level of reading. What we know is that these assessments are high stakes exams where they really will determine and have a big influence as to your pathways. There's a huge lack of information around these assessments in terms of what do they really mean for when students come in to take them, lack of preparation, and to be able to take these exams prepared so that students would be out of math for 1, 2, 3 years, and then they come in and take this math exam without any review. And it also, so when students take the test, if they don't do too well, it'll affect how quickly they will meet their goal. What we know about coursework, then, once students take these exams, they're going to be placed into 1 to 4 levels. If they're not at college level, they go 1 to 4 levels below transfer level math or English. And we know that the courses have several exit points where students will have to take several courses. They'll be able to leave and stop out throughout these courses. And we know that a lot of these courses deal with remedial pedagogy, where it's the sheets, the drill and type of learning where you don't really engage students. It's more of that repetitive high school type of learning that often happens where it's not effective in essence. And so while we might see, or often high school students might see community college as a very linear experience where I'm going to go to college, I'm going to go to community college and transfer in 2 years, right? And the majority coming in aspire to transfer, but once they leave, there's about 11% transfer rate. So 30% transfer rate is pretty good compared to the other averages, right? But what we know is that developmental education will contribute to a nonlinear pathway. So once all those students aspire to transfer, they have to apply, they have to take the assessment. That's an opportunity based on where they placed to stop out of community college and not continue. They have to continue with developmental education if that's the pathway that they have to take. In order to get a certificate, there's developmental education courses some students might have to take. In order to get an associate degree, there's more developmental education courses some students might have to take. In order to transfer, there's more developmental education courses some students might have to take, depending on where they place, right? So it's a very nonlinear pathway, and there's a lot of exit points. So focusing on California, as Dr. Solorzano mentioned earlier, it serves about 25% of the almost 3 million community college students nationwide. And we can see the difference between California and Texas. So California is definitely leading the way in terms of community college enrollments, and now we have 113 community colleges. But what are these students? Who are these students, right? Who are we serving? So what we see is over the past couple of decades, the population for Native American population has been about stable at around 1%. For African American population as well, around 7%. For Asian American populations, not including Pacific Islanders, the rates have been holding steady about 14. That's increased slightly to 16%. But for white students, we have seen a great decrease the last couple of decades, right? Where they went from 50% to now 28%. For Latinas and Latinos, last school year they were at 42% of the population, and you can see it's on the increase. A lot of this has to do with the K-12 population that was mentioned earlier as well. That's also increasing for Latinas and Latinos, right? So part of the reason why there's such a large Latino population in the community colleges is that when we think about those pursuing post-secondary education, 80 out of 100 are going into the community college system, okay? Now, out of those 80, the completion rates are pretty low. When we think about the CTE degree completion rates, there's about 3 out of those 80, and about 11 out of those 80 will transfer. But we know basic skills is a big issue. Out of those 11 who transfer, 9 will go to CSU, 2 will come to the UC system. And so we see critical leakage point as the basic skills, where 85% of all community college students assess into developmental education. So it's not just a Latino issue, it's all the community college students in California, right? So what I'm going to be sharing with you today comes from several data sources and several projects and papers. One of them is on the table that I worked on with Ryan Santos and Danny Solorzano. And so I'm going to go briefly over the quantitative stuff because you can access that, and I'm going to make time for the qualitative side. So this comes from, data comes from the Basic Skills Progress Tracker for the community college system. There's qualitative data from the UC Accord Pathways Project, which interviewed 110 students from 3 different community colleges in Southern California, and then a pilot case study, which I'm working on, and it focuses on instructors' pedagogy and pedagogical practices within the classroom. So I'd love to talk to you all after. So when we think about who's placing in developmental ed, and where are they placing, right? It's really important to consider where students are going. We see for the most part that students we know 70 to 85% are going to developmental education. But when we think about 4 years later, we're focusing on math here, how many of them will pass transfer level math? So if we have 100 African American students, 4 years later, 7 out of those 100 will pass that math class. If we have 100 Asian American students, 27 will pass the math class. Out of 100 Latinas and Latinos, 4 years later, 17 will pass the transfer math, and out of 100 white students, 22 will pass the transfer math. So what's important in this figure is to see that this is where students are placing. So there's 4 levels below transfer level math, 3 levels below transfer level math, 2 and 1. So we see that for Asian American students, these numbers are backwards for the Asian American students. So these are 46 go at 1 level below, and then 31 will go 2 levels below, and 15 will go 3 levels below, and then only 8 will go 4 levels below. So that's the only one. But then for the others, they're the correct placement where Latinas and Latinos are focusing on them. 26 out of the 100 will be 4 levels below. No, these are also backwards too. Sorry, guys. I have a 4-month-old, so like I said, when I was not lying about lack of sleep. So when we think about 100 Latinas and Latinos, where are they placing? So 26 of them will be 1 level below transfer level math. 32 will be 3 levels below. 27 will be 2 levels below. And 14 will be 4 levels below. And so out of that, 4 years later, 17 will pass the transfer math. So here we have the correct placement. And for Latinas and Latinos, we have 54,000 in fall 2009 in developmental education. And these aren't the ones who place. These are the ones who enroll in developmental education math. And so what we see in the data is that the lower they place, the less chance they will be able to pass the class, right? 4 years later, the transfer level math class. But what are their experiences like? So what's happening with students? This is coming from part of the pilot study where the instructor is talking to the person who's going to be evaluating them. There's an instructor who's a recent Chicana PhD graduate. She is teaching in the community college system in intermediate algebra. And so her evaluator is telling her, don't take it personally if you start with 40 students and end up with 24. And she says, when is this supposed to happen? I started with 41 and I still have 40 students. And the evaluator says, well, it can be gradual. They stop showing up, a couple of them each week. They have complicated lives and can't keep up with college. And so I spoke with her yesterday, and she's like, I still have 40 students, by the way, right? And so we're almost, the term's almost over. So students are facing these deficit perspectives that were noted earlier from the administrator level. And we have Contreras and Contreras recently did a piece where they also emphasize that as well. But students also face academic invalidation, which was brought up earlier. And so we have Denise, who's a community college student, and who you can see the deficit and demeaning pedagogical practices where she says, my math teacher is not so great. She's not approachable, she kind of makes fun of you, dumbs you down, makes you feel dumb. This one girl asks, can you show me something on the calculator? And she's like, it's right here, you can't see it? In front of the whole class. I never ask her any questions. Even if I need to know something, I just will not ask a question in that class. And there's several more examples we can give, right, of invalidation. But I want to focus a little bit on what can we do? So what are the strengths of these students or the strengths of instructors? And what we see in students is that they're persisting, they're trying, and so I'm reframing persistence as attempting multiple times to pass these classes. So we have Natalia, whose goal is to major in radiology and transfer to CSU Northridge, and she says, I'm thinking this time I'm going to get a math class that I want. I tried the big classroom, twice a week, 4 hours, didn't work. I tried a small classroom, twice a week, 4 hours, didn't work. So now I'm gonna get a small classroom every day for an hour. So students are trying different strategies, right? And this will be her 3rd time, so it'll be the last time she'll be able to take that math class at that community college. Otherwise, she's gonna have to continue to a different college to start over again. One thing I wanna point to is what we've called, alongside Ryan Santos, Juliana Alonso, and Dr. Solorzano, is critical race validating pedagogy, where it's informed by CRT, it's informed by critical race pedagogy, and Rendon's validation theory, which was brought up earlier too. So self-reflection, there's 5 basic elements where we talk about self-reflection about previous moments of academic invalidation. So it's almost like you allow this healing process. Bridging highest educational aspirations with expectations, improving academic skill sets and academic confidence, acknowledging students' social identities as a source of strength, and culturally relevant and social justice curriculum. I can't go over all 5 of them right now, but I'm gonna give a couple examples. So that instructor that I mentioned earlier, this is her talking about self-reflecting about previous moments of invalidation in math. And this is how it plays out. So she says, when a student walks into the office and starts crying because she thinks she just failed her last exam and she has to pass the class, you listen to her, go over the syllabus, look at the grading policy, and give her advice on dealing with math anxiety. So you're acknowledging that there is math anxiety, there's these issues going on, even though she's not your student and you've never even met her before. Right, so this is an instructor this is her 1st term teaching, and word got around, maybe you should go to this person to ask for help. And then also improving academic skill sets and academic confidence. So what does that look like? And she's remembering what you said. The student who got a 9 says, is this out of 20 for an assignment? And the instructor says, no, it's out of 10. The student says, really? And the instructor says, yes. She says, well, I never did well in math in high school. I'm not used to this. My teacher said I wasn't good. Someone must be teaching right. So right away the student is saying, you know, you're a good instructor. Versus, then the instructor says, someone must be learning and doing his work. Right? So giving the opportunity to the student to say, maybe that happened in the past, but look at you now, right? You're learning, you're gaining this academic confidence. And the student says, you're making miracles happen, right? So this is an instructor who the students have to pass her class or else they're going to get kicked out of community college. Key recommendations that I've developed from various research studies and from a lot of this work, a lot of the pathways work that's out there is we need to have a PK-14 or PK-20 curricular alignment. If there's 85% of students, all of California community college students on average are placing into developmental education, there's something wrong with our system, right? It is not the students, it's definitely an alignment issue. So it can start as some things with collaborating with high schools to either to prepare students for placement or for the coursework, but we need to institutionalize placement measures beyond assessment tests where, for example, that instructor that I mentioned earlier, she had passed the AP calculus test, but she couldn't at a community college use that assessment test as placement. So she had to start in developmental education again. We need to reduce the length and decrease the number of developmental education courses. There's a lot of individual sites attempting different strategies where they have modules, they have computerized programs. There's different approaches that are working and that are effective that we need to figure out how to do at a large scale base in California. Implementing learning communities thus have been proven time and again to be very effective for students, for first generation students in particular, as part of the first year experience program components as well. We need to improve obviously instruction developmental education. It's not that students, one thing is they're not prepared academically, but another thing is now they're coming to you and you as an instructor, how are you going to address those issues that all the students are coming with? We need to expand the Puente model. Something I forgot to mention is the Puente model it resembles that critical race validating pedagogy. And right now Puente will serve some of the developmental education English students, but not all levels, and it doesn't work with math students, right? So this is something we need to think about within California at least to expand. But we also need to learn from effective, culturally relevant practices that are already happening in minority-serving institutions. So in the tribal colleges, Conrad and Gassman just came out with the minority-served MSI book, and they have so many examples of some effective strategies that are happening in minority-serving institutions, and they're drastically changing the success rates that are happening in certain colleges. So we need to learn from what's already successful and figure out how to not just place these mandates as a Student Success Act on colleges, right? But really foster how are these success rates going to happen? How are we going to make the change? So we know what to do, but now how are you going to do that at each college? And how are you going to offer funding for each college to do these things? So thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists today. How about another round of applause for all three of our panelists? Thank you. So we are actually doing well on time, so thank you so much for pushing through the presentations and making some time for Q&A. We have a mic right here in the center of the room. If you have a question and you feel comfortable, you can come up to the mic, or you can just raise your hand and use your teacher voice.
Hi, I'm actually in K-12 education. I'm director of secondary, and one of the barriers that we found is when we try to reach out to community colleges to align curricula, we often come up with a lot of barriers or hoops to jump through. And I'm curious about, from your perspectives, why you think that is.
So I guess I'll take it this way. So at Santa Monica College, we have students that come from 100 different high schools, okay, different school districts. So if we were to align curriculum, we've tried to pilot with our, I guess, feeder district, which would be Santa Monica, Malibu, but when faculty talk to faculty, there's always kind of a difference in opinion of certain things, you know, and what should be taught and what's important. So I think once we get past that and we really get to the nitty-gritty in terms of what do we agree on in terms of the skill sets that students have to go ahead and be successful in both high school and in college, then we can have a conversation about, okay, let's align the curriculum. We're trying different things. I know with the Pathways model, we're part of the LA High Tech grant. We're trying to start at the K-12 level, high school level, to see what we can go ahead and create in terms of pathways for students so it's seamless, that transition from high school to college. So things are in play, but it takes a long time. I think the best model out there is Long Beach City College with their Promise model, Long Beach Promise, but it's taken 20 years for them to get to the point they're at right now. So the K-12 or K-14 kind of partnerships, it's possible, but it just takes a lot of leadership and investment to go ahead and really make sure that happens. But it's a lot easier when it's one district working with another district. But for us, it's the most complicated model that you can have out there, just because we have students coming from so many districts. And so we would have to engage in so many conversations to make it happen. But I think it's possible. It's possible. So.
Thank you. We have another question? Enrique?
Yeah. So this question is for Carola.
Yeah, it's not working. Enrique, could you maybe just stand and use a loud voice?
So this question is for Carola, and I think you mentioned in the parents who attain a college degree for the students that were undocumented or immigrants. I believe it was about 32%, right?
Something like that.
Yeah. So for those, is there data, or does the data show whether the parents got their college degrees here in the U.S. or back in their home countries?
They were in the home countries. So those yes. So those were largely in the home countries. Why do you ask? Just curiosity. All right, okay. Curiosity is a good thing, I think you heard from me.
Also because there's an opportunity for parents to, I think it plays a different role when the parents have attained their education here as opposed to back in their home country, because the access might be different as well. And
Right.
so,
No, I think, but for this sample, they were fairly recently arrived, and for the most part, their parents were college educated from abroad.
Good morning. My name is Kalinda Ray Iwamizu, and I'm an adjunct instructor at Los Angeles Southwest College. And my greatest concern, and I noticed I've been full-time as well before, and I noticed that when I was full-time, I had a lot more time to invest in the students, and you noted that the instructor-student relationship is very important. I guess we can come up with all of these initiatives, but the majority of our professoriate is adjunct, and they are going from school to school, and they don't really have time to sit with students beyond their 35 minutes apportioned by the district, or perhaps an hour if they teach 2 or 3 classes. So what are you doing, if anything, and what is your recommendation in terms of increasing full-time faculty numbers or increasing availability for even adjuncts?
I'm not an administrator, so I can't, but I'll say 2 things. One is, I think this is a horrible structural inequity, right? The students who need the most are the students who get the least. So it's horrible for the students, and it's horrible, frankly, for the teachers, because I think they're instructors, because the instructors, it's not a great quality of life. It's also a business model that you're seeing increasingly at NYU. We were seeing increasingly a divestment in professors, and more classes being taught by adjuncts. So it's a statement about our economic realities, which I clearly don't endorse. But I'm not the mistress of the universe. But that's just a general statement about
inequities and our economic realities right now. So I think that, you know, we need to be doing more to try to change that. But that said, even if you can't spend much time as an individual instructor, I would say that it's really important to recognize that every interaction you have with a teacher, with a student matters. That even if you can't spend a lot of time in class or after class, every interaction you have with a student matters. So you know, one of the things we noticed was in remedial classrooms, microaggressions happened a lot more often there than they did in non-remedial classrooms. So disparaging comments, like some of the ones you mentioned, are more likely to happen in classrooms where teachers don't think highly of their students. So those are things that are not a function, I think, of whether you're a full-time professor or an adjunct. It's a function of what you think about your students. And I'm not pointing to you at all, but that's a teacher expectation issue. It's just a consciousness that every interaction matters. And then cognitive engagement, that's about believing every student can learn, should learn, and it's your job to try to make them think and want and know they can think. And so teaching every class that way is, I think, an important part of your role.
You know, through the Teaching and Learning Center, one of the big challenges that we have is how do we, you know, reach out to the part-time faculty, because that's really the majority of the faculty. So we've tried different things. We've tried different resources for faculty online to go ahead and tap into. Had different, I guess, hours of operation to have faculty just come in if they need one-on-one help. But also different training institutes during a set period of time and given some form of compensation to encourage people to participate. So we've been fairly successful with that. We had Winter Institute, Summer Institute, and by doing that, what we end up seeing is that the faculty, the full-time or part-time, they build this kind of support group. And so you get like-minded individuals who are really looking to improve the art of teaching, because that's what it is, an art. And so that's when you begin to reflect a little bit more on the practice, on, you know, what you're doing, how can I change this and change that. Because to be honest, I mean, the professor's job is not easy. It's not easy because you have to try to engage students. They're at different levels. It's such a diverse learning environment in the classroom that you really have to go in with a toolbox or a skill set to be able to kind of help students. And so we try to provide that as much as possible. And it really comes from the district, you know, and making that investment in the faculty, because that's the most important, you know, function of the community college, is that teaching function. So so we were trying different things. Some things work, some things don't. But, you know, keep on doing your best. You know, it's what you're doing is helping our students. So that's you know, keep on doing that work. So.
Thank you. So we are just about out of time for our Q&A section of this panel. If there are more questions, again, I'd encourage you to write them down, note them, so that we can engage in the discussion again at the end of the day. At this point, I wanted to invite those folks who registered for our lunch. It's happening in the Sequoia room. That's right, Carlos? Sequoia room.
We're going to be going to the Sequoia room. That's at the other end of the faculty center. And Darlene, okay, Rebecca, they're at the back there.